Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, I thought it would be a nice idea if you can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I had one of those late shifts where the city felt like a different place, softer lights, fewer cars, all the normal noise thinned out. I was tired in the small, steady way you get after the 10th ride. The app pinged, I pulled up, and he was already there on the curb. Middle of the night, cheap jacket, hands in his pockets, just standing like he had nowhere else to be, but also like he had a plan I couldn't guess. He climbed in without looking at me. No hello, no how are you, nothing. He just shut the door and sat, hands folded in his lap, eyes locked on my dashboard. Not on me, not on the window, just the dash. The little lights, the air vents, the rectangle where the phone sat while I ran the app. He kept staring at that spot like it was a movie he couldn't miss. I asked him where to. He didn't answer. I asked again, more casual. He didn't answer. He didn't say yes or no. He didn't even shrug. He just watched the dash. There was no look of annoyance, no nervous glance. He was perfectly still, like someone who was holding their breath for a long time and forgot to start again. At first, I thought maybe he was on his phone and didn't hear me. I glanced at the app. No destination. That happens sometimes. People said it after they were in the car. I told him to drop a pin or say a cross street. He moved his head a millimeter and kept watching the little glow of the climate controls. That was the first thing that prickled, the way he followed my hands when I reached for the phone, how his eyes tracked the small motions I made without looking anywhere else. It made my hands feel exposed. He smelled like soap and damp fabric, like he'd been sitting under a light sprinkle and not bothered to dry off. The smell was faint but there. I noticed his shoes when he shifted once. One shoe was scuffed, the other looked barely worn. His jacket was buttoned up tight, even though the car was warm. Small things kept sliding past me and sitting heavy in my mind. I tried to make small talk, stupid driver things that usually fill the quiet weather, traffic, how late it was. He didn't answer. Once, he made a tiny noise, like he was testing the sound of his throat, but it wasn't a word. I kept thinking he'd say where he wanted to go any second, like he had forgotten and his memory would come back. That didn't happen. We started moving because there wasn't anything else to do. I figured he'd speak up when he wanted to. The city was almost empty. The radio wasn't on. The hum of tires on pavement was the loudest thing. Every time I checked the rear view, he was the same, hands folded, gaze fixed. He watched the dashboard like it was giving him something private. It felt like being watched by someone with no intention of hiding it. Halfway through the ride, he reached into his pocket and took out a small paper map, the kind folded like an old handkerchief. He didn't unfold it. He held it and put it down and picked it up again. He looked at the lines on that tiny page for a fistful of seconds and then smoothed it with his fingers. He never looked at me while he did it. That should have been normal, but pulled tight against everything else it wasn't. A few blocks later, a man crossed the street in a hurry and glanced over at us. The passenger's head turned, just enough for his profile to show in the mirror, and he mouthed something like no. It was so faint I wasn't sure I heard it, and I didn't know who he was saying it to. The pedestrian, the empty night, the car behind us. The pedestrian didn't notice anything wrong and kept walking. But the thought of him saying no to something that wasn't happening made my stomach move cold. I tried again to get a destination. Look, man, I gotta know where to go. If you don't tell me, I can drop you and finish the ride on my app. I kept my voice light, like it was no big deal. He only looked a fraction of an inch up and said, "Don't turn it off." His voice was quiet, like a thought rather than a sentence. It didn't make sense. I asked him what he meant. He didn't explain. Traffic light after traffic light. I wanted to call dispatch, or the emergency line, or someone. I opened Uber support in the app to see what the protocol was. The app is dumb in those moments. It had the rider's first name and a little gray picture, nothing else. No phone number I could call from the app. The city felt suddenly big and empty, like the car was a small island. He tapped the dash once. Just a single finger, middle of the plastic, not hard. It didn't make a sound, but he did it like someone testing if the silence would crack. Then he tapped again in the same place 2 minutes later. I asked why. He didn't look at me. He kept watching the lights in front of him through the windshield, and his finger moved like it belonged to a different person than the one who sat. I pulled into a 24-hour gas station because my brain was looking for places that had light and other people. The idea was to park, call the non-emergency number, and wait. The pump lights were bright and close, and there were a couple of people at the convenience store. I expected him to get out. He didn't. He sat and stared, and when I killed the engine, his body didn't move. I told him again, I'm gonna end the ride and you need to get out. He tilted his head a hair and said, don't make me get out. That was the second time he said something that sounded like it meant more than it said. I remembered then that the little rectangle where my phone sat had a tiny reflection of his pupils. The closer I looked in the mirror, the more I saw him watching me watching him. It made my skin feel thin. I opened my door just a crack to put my legs out on the pavement and kept both hands on the wheel. The interior light made the car look small and close, like someone had closed a box around us. I told him I'd call the police if he didn't step out. He looked at me for maybe a second, full on, face toward me for the first real time, and then he smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It wasn't a threatening smile, not in the movie way. It was the kind of smile you make when you realize a tiny, private joke. It didn't match anything else about him. It was the worst thing because it made the rest of him even more unreadable. He grabbed the map and folded it small and put it back in his pocket. He leaned forward, and for a moment his hand rested near the gear shift like he could touch it if he wanted. I told him to get out again. He didn't move. He said, just drive. I didn't want to. I had no idea what he wanted. I could take him to the police station, to a different gas station, to a hospital. He had not given me anything to believe besides that he wanted the car to move and didn't want to say where. I did what felt the most boring and safe. I started driving again toward the nearest nearby area with people, watching every shadow in the rear view. He began to hum. Just a low, steady sound under everything else. It wasn't a tune I knew. It fit the road like it had been built into the asphalt. I kept my hands at 10 and 2 and watched the white dots on the lane markers go by. The humming was steady, like a machine. Sometimes it synced with the beat of my own heart, and that made me realize how loud my chest was. We hit a stretch where the streetlights were farther apart and the city felt like it had been rubbed thin. A car pulled up behind us and stayed close, like the driver wanted to keep pace. I saw it in the mirror and my chest tightened. I took an exit to drop them. The car behind followed. I took another. It followed. It wasn't fast. It didn't flash lights. It was patient. I drove like everyone else does, making sure I was obeying signs, picking routes that had people. The other car matched me turn for turn. I felt small and watched in a way that wasn't the passenger. It was the idea of being noticed that pressed down. At a stoplight, I rolled down my window because it felt better to have fresh air. The passenger's head was turned toward me at an angle, so his eyes were in the mirror. For the first time, his face looked like he was waiting for something. The car behind humped once a bored, impatient sound. He tucked his chin in for a second. His mouth moved as if he were talking to someone I couldn't hear. The light turned green and the car behind sped off. I thought about calling 911 when the streets were busy enough that the operator's voice would be quick. I kept the number in my thumb and warmed it up like it was a stone I could throw. I didn't call because the passenger was still there, and I didn't want to make him angry, because I had no idea what angry would mean for him. The map in his pocket felt bigger in my head than it was in reality. The final thing that pushed me was small and stupid. He reached out and touched the little sticker on my dashboard that had my license number. It was one of those stuff you get when you sign up, small and sticky. His fingertips brushed it like someone checking the temperature of a pan. He turned it over as if reading a secret, and then he said, "You live close." I lied because my mouth moved before my brain did. I said I lived on the opposite side of the river. He nodded like I had told him something true, and then he put his hand on the seat between us. It was a small, careful motion, like someone setting down a cup. He didn't look at me. He watched the road ahead and let his fingers rest there so he could feel the warmth of the leather. When he moved his hand from the seat toward the gear shift that time, it felt like a decision. I didn't grab him. I pulled over instead into the busiest place I could think of, a hospital drop-off that had wheels turning and doors opening and people coming and going. I left the engine running. I reached down and hit the lock with my thumb as I opened my door. If he got out fast, he'd be the one running into a crowd. If worse came, a crowd meant witnesses. He didn't get out. He watched me open the door, watched the people motion by, and then he stood up like he had been standing for hours. He gathered himself the way you fold a map, quickly, precisely, and moved to the back door. He didn't walk like someone who wanted to leave. He walked like someone who wanted to make sure he could. I stepped out, told him again to get out, and kept my hand on the car. People looked over. A woman with a stroller asked if I needed help. I said no, just give me a minute, and I said it steady. He didn't move. The hospital doors slid shut behind a set of arriving visitors, and he put his hand on the frame of the door like he wasn't sure what other door he needed. When I glanced up, a security guard was watching us. I walked toward him and didn't take my eyes off the passenger. The guard asked if everything was okay. I said no and told a version of the truth, that the rider wouldn't give me a drop-off and wouldn't get out. The guard's attention snapped to the car. He clicked his radio and came around the front of the vehicle. The guy in the back door froze like someone had said his name. He looked at the guard, then at me, then at the crowd that had started to form. For the first time since he'd climbed in, his face showed something honest, a calculation. He pushed the door open, not fast, not slow, and he walked out. He kept his hands open, palms down, like an empty offer. He didn't run. He didn't make a noise. He folded his shoulders like he was making himself smaller. We all kept watching. The guard asked the guy for ID. The guy said he didn't have any. He said his name in a voice that was the same level as the hum of the hospital AC. The guard radioed, and in a few minutes 2 more uniforms appeared. They asked questions. The guy answered a few and then stopped. In the end, they told him to go with them. He didn't fight. He didn't cry. He walked a few steps and then he was gone inside a set of doors that led away from me in the car. I sat down on the curb and lapped my hands around a paper cup of coffee the guard tossed me because my hands were still shaking. My phone buzzed an Uber notification for a new ping. I watched the road for a long time, feeling like every small sound was a message. The guy never came back up the street. I gave the guard my statement, and the app logged the ride. Later, when I checked the trip details, the map showed we had driven in a lazy loop I couldn't remember planning, like I'd taken the long way around without knowing why. Everyone kept saying I was lucky. I wasn't sure if that was true. I felt raw, like a scab someone kept scratching. I kept thinking about the way he had watched the dash, the way his hand had rested on the seat, the tiny noises he had made. I kept thinking about how many times the night had been quiet enough for small things to feel like big ones. I drove my car home that night and locked the door behind me. I changed my route the next few weeks. I took different shifts. It was nothing spectacular, no dramatic chase, no dramatic rescue, just a slow squeeze of not right that finally gave me a place to stand. I went back to driving eventually. The city kept turning. The lights still hummed. The dash in every car I sat in felt like something to be careful with. I picked him up on a Tuesday at like 2 in the morning, because that's when the late night bar crowd really thins and the app throws you the weird ones. The pickup's at a normal house on Cedar, the little blue dot, porch light, home in the notes. I drove up. There was a car in the drive, a mailbox with the right number, someone leaving a pizza box on the stoop. It all looked fine. He got in and shut the door like it was normal. He had one of those cheap backpacks, the kind that looks like it held a laptop once. He smelled like someone who'd been standing outside smoking and then stepped in the rain, tobacco, wet denim. He didn't say hi. He didn't say anything. The app already had the drop-off pinned a different address, the kind of place people put in when they're hammered and don't want to type, so I hit navigate and pulled out. For the first 5 minutes, everything was uneventful. He stared at his phone for a while, thumb just scrolling. Then he stopped. He set the phone face down on his knee, folded his hands, and watched the windshield. Not me. Not the passing lights. He watched the road like he was waiting for something specific to happen. I asked if he wanted the radio. He said no. I said something dumb about how the night was quiet. He gave me a small shrug that didn't reach his face. Little things piled up. He had a paper receipt in his back pocket, folded wrong. One shoe had a grinding noise when he shifted, like someone had tried to glue the sole. He kept biting his lower lip like he was tasting something metallic. None of it was alarming on its own. Together they felt off. We hit a part of town where the streetlights are older and throw pools instead of even light. The GPS said we were almost there. I turned down a side street because that's what the app told me to do, and the houses went away fast. The houses turned to chain link, then to broken sidewalks, then to a row of old warehouse facades. One of the warehouses still had a rusted sign that said Hamilton Supplies, half missing. The address on the app lined up with a loading bay. Someone had spray painted the number on the concrete. It did not look like home. I slowed. I thought the app was glitching, or that the map data was wrong. I checked the phone. The pin was exactly where the driver should stop. I thought about telling the guy, but his face was flat. He didn't look surprised. He didn't ask me if this was right. He just tightened his grip on the strap of his backpack like he was preparing for a bump on a road we couldn't see. A group of people were by the warehouse door. They didn't rush us or wave. They just stood in a loose cluster, like people who had been meeting there regularly and were used to stuffing themselves into the dark. Jackets, hooded sweatshirts, one with a reflective vest. The closest one had his hands in his pockets and watched our car as if he'd been timing it. When I pulled up, he leaned forward a little and didn't move when I killed the motor. The passenger didn't move either. He kept staring ahead. I asked him if this was the right place. He blinked and said very quietly, "Yeah." The word was small and it didn't help anything. There are those moments where you think you must be overreacting because nothing dramatic has happened yet. I had one then. All those small sounds, the hum of the app, a distant dog, the buzz from the old street lamp felt louder than they should. One of the men by the door started to clap his hands once, quick, private gesture. Not loud. Not a signal. just to clap like someone checking the sound of his own hands. It made the passenger glance at him for a split second and then look back as if to anchor himself. I had a policy: if I didn't feel safe, I wouldn't get out. I kept the doors locked and rolled my window down an inch because I didn't want to scream I'm scared in a crowded way. The man by the door called something I couldn't hear, and one of the others laughed like they were sharing a joke. The laugh didn't travel. It landed in the air between car and building and sat there. My mouth went dry. I told the passenger to step out if that was where he wanted to be. He sighed like an apparatus needing resetting and unbuckled. He didn't hop out. He fumbled with the door like the muscles didn't know the job. The warehouse men didn't move toward us, but they didn't move away either. One of them put a hand on the metal frame of the loading door and leaned his weight into it like he was making sure it was solid. A guy in a reflective vest, who looked older than the rest, walked up to my window and spoke through the gap. "You okay?" he asked like a neighbor checking on a busted mailbox. His voice was casual, too casual. Normal questions have warmth. This had none. "Yeah," I said. I was already looking at my phone for the emergency button. It takes 2 taps in a call, but when your fingers are shaking, 2 taps can take a lifetime. I didn't hit it. I tried to read the man's face instead, like reading could replace action. The passenger finally opened his door. He took a half step and then turned and looked back at me. His eyes were glassy. He wasn't looking at me so much as past me, like he could see a path on the other side of the building. "Take care," he said to me, like that was the usual thing people said when they left me. He set his backpack on the pavement. He did not look like someone who was walking into a meeting. He looked like someone wearing a mask he'd forgotten he was wearing. He turned his back and walked to the group. One of the guys stepped forward to meet him and they hugged, short, one-armed, like they had agreed on something with a single movement. The passenger's shoulders softened as if he was relieved. The longer he stood with them, the harder breathing felt in my chest. No one touched my car, so I couldn't call that a robbery attempt. No one smashed a window. There wasn't a sudden shout. It was all slow and ordinary with little wrong edges, a handshake that lasted too long, eyes that didn't look away, the man in the vest checking the pockets of the guy next to him and then nodding like he confirmed something. I watched my passenger pass a small paper envelope across a palm. It was the size of a receipt. "I should go," I said, because the alternative at 2 in the morning was to be a sitting duck. The man in the vest smiled with one side of his mouth and said, "You're good, buddy." It was a statement, not a question. The kind of thing people say when they control the situation. The passenger laughing then, soft, pleased, like someone who had just gotten away with something, felt like a slap. When I turned the key, the engine didn't scream, it just started, like someone breathing. The men didn't step back. The passenger didn't hurry to me. He stood a foot away, hands in his pockets, watching the car like he expected something to change when it moved. I had never seen the group before. I didn't know what the transaction was. It could have been drugs, money, a ride to another place. It could have been nothing illegal at all. But the feeling of being watched by people who had assembled specifically for you made everything hitch. They watched me as if I were a piece of furniture, assessing whether it was useful to keep. I eased forward, keeping my hands where they were. One of the men walked into my blind spot at the rear of the car and then stopped and didn't move. He was close enough that if he'd wanted to, he could have reached for the handle. He didn't. He didn't need to. The message was clear without words. I kept the car between myself and the warehouse and backed out slowly until the bumper hit the curb. I didn't want to make a scene, but I also wanted to be able to leave quickly. When I shifted into drive, my phone vibrated in my hand. It was the app, a message from the writer. "Sorry about the address, forgot to change it." "Thanks." That message felt like a stone in my throat. I hit the emergency contact in the app. A recorded voice told me it would connect me to a dispatcher. While it spun, the passenger started walking with the group toward a door that was slightly ajar. He didn't look back. The man in the vest nodded at him like a referee approving a play. One of the other men slapped the passenger on the shoulder, and the passenger laughed again, louder this time. The laugh was bright and wrong. The dispatcher connected, and I told them what was happening. I tried to keep my voice steady. I told them the address, said there were people, said I felt unsafe. They told me someone would be dispatched and to stay where I was or to leave if I felt threatened. If you can drive to a well-lit area, the operator said, which felt like permission and an order at once. I started to pull away. As I did, one of the men took 2 steps and opened his arms as if to block the passenger from turning away. The passenger didn't notice because he was looking straight at the man in the reflective vest, and he was smiling like he'd won something. I drove forward, slow, and the man in the vest made a small movement like he had expected me to do that exact thing and counted on it. I didn't stop. I kept my foot light on the gas and my eyes on the road and the rear view. The group clustered in the doorway and watched us go like they'd been waiting for applause. My hands were numb from holding the wheel too tight. I dialed 911 as I turned onto Cedar and told them everything. They asked for details I was shaky on, details that felt stupid at the time, license plate descriptions. I gave them what I could. The dispatcher asked if anyone in my vehicle was harmed. Nobody was. She told me officers were on the way. She told me to drive to the nearest police station if I could do so safely. I did. I drove there with the radio off and the heat on, fingers white on the wheel, and every reflective surface in the car felt like eyes. I sat in the station parking lot until an officer came out and took my statement. He typed and asked the same questions again, which made the story smaller and more organized and therefore less weird. He thanked me for calling. He said they'd check the warehouse. They didn't promise anything. They said, "We'll check it out," and the calm voice people used to stop you from worrying while they do paperwork. A few hours later, through the official channels, not my view, the neighbor told me the place had been active for months. People came at night, the neighbor said, sometimes early in the morning, always in small groups. The neighbor didn't call because he thought it was just business and he didn't want trouble. The officer who took my report said they found a few people inside and had done searches. I didn't get details. I didn't ask for more than I needed to feel like my story had weight. I kept driving after that, taking different routes, looking at warehouse doors in a different way. The app still pinged. I still drove. But that night shifted something. I couldn't stop thinking about how small the choices were, the way a pin on a map could drop your car at a loading dock, the way a laugh could mean celebration or account, the way a man who asked you okay could be the one who decided you were. I never saw that passenger again. I never found out exactly what had happened inside the warehouse. The police called me a week later to say they'd made an arrest and had been watching the place for a while. That was enough for me. I locked the doors like always, but after that I kept them on the lock even when the car was empty and the app asked me to take a break. The city kept moving, lights flicked on and off, and the warehouses stayed where they'd always been. I just had a different memory of them now. I was on a late shift, the kind where the city thins and your brain goes soft. It was past 3, steady drizzle, windshield dotted with tiny streaks. The app pinged and a guy climbed in without saying a word. He had a dark hoodie zipped up, a duffel at his feet, and he smelled like cigarettes and cheap cologne. He didn't make small talk. He checked the map, put his phone face down, and folded his hands. He watched the road through the windshield like he was memorizing it. When I asked where he wanted to go, he tapped a pin and said an address near the river. It sounded normal. I started the ride. For a while it was the usual late-night rhythm, tires, distant traffic, the heaters low on. Then little things started to tilt. He watched the rear view too long, like he could see me without looking at me. He hummed once and stopped, and that silence felt too loud. He kept biting his lower lip. Once his hand trembled when he reached into his duffel, and then he glanced at me like it wasn't his. We were about halfway when he asked, casual as a weather question, "You carry cash when you're driving?" I said yeah, a bit for tips or gas. He asked how much. I said maybe 30 or 40. He made a small approving sound and went quiet. People ask strange stuff at night. I didn't want to make him defensive, so I kept my voice light. He started asking other things. Do I work nights often? Do I go downtown after shifts? Do I ever leave the car running when I run in some place? The questions were normal enough to answer, but they all probed holes, places someone could exploit. Each answer felt like handing over a map. At one stoplight, he leaned forward and brushed the dash where my phone sat. "You keep your mount up there?" he asked. I said yes. He nodded and smiled a little, not like a joke, but like someone pleased with a fact. When I hit a pile, his fingers tightened on the duffel strap. I noticed then that his shoes were scuffed, one sole more worn than the other, like he'd been walking rough edges. Small things stacked up and made my chest heavy. He had this way of looking at mirrors, not glancing, but scanning, like he was reading a room. Twice he would ask a question and then interrupt his own sentence to say something else, like, "Do you know? Forget it." That stopping made me fill in blanks I didn't want to. Small noises started to mean things. A loose fitting on the sun visor that clicked when I shifted, the tiny scent of oil when a bus passed, the way an alley echoed when we drove by. Once a kid on a bike rang his bell and the passenger's head snapped toward him, and he mouthed later so fast I almost missed it. Then, like shrugging off a coat, he unzipped his hoodie more and revealed a holster. A gun outline showed under fabric. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't brand new. It was quiet, present, an object that belonged to someone's routine. He didn't brandish it. He didn't point it. He just left it visible and kept watching the road. "Don't worry," he said, as if that explained everything. "I don't flash it around." His voice was steady, like he was naming household chores. My hands tightened on the wheel. All the background noises, the heater, the tires, a distant siren, got crisp and too loud. He asked the cash question again and started to ask specifics. "How much do you usually have in the glove? What about the console? Ever at home, in a drawer?" I tried to keep answers small. I said I'd keep most on card. He asked if I drove alone. I said yes. He asked about cameras at my place. I lied about some things because the truth felt like handing over keys. We were close to his drop-off when a van pulled up behind and stayed close, matching my turns. Not aggressive, just steady. I took a side street to lose it and watched in the mirror as it didn't follow. Then it looped and reappeared ahead at a light. Its tail lights bobbed like an animal pacing. The passenger noticed it and didn't comment, but his eyes sharpened. He started noting my habits, or I glanced in mirrors, how I checked the app, how my foot settled on the gas. It felt like a manual he was writing about me. I considered turning into the police lot 2 blocks over. I thought about flashing my hazards to call attention. Each option felt like a choice that could change everything. Instead, I kept driving, because the most normal answer sometimes felt safest. He told a story about a friend who'd been held up, told it in flat tones about how the friend learned to keep cash hidden. The story wasn't violent, but it sounded like a lesson. He folded and refolded 20 and slid it into the seam of his holster like that was routine. He didn't ask for money. He didn't lean toward mine. He was being casual and matter-of-fact, and the matter-of-fact parts were the worst. At a dim stretch of road he asked, "How much cash you got on you, right now?" The question wasn't loud. It was precise. The world narrowed to the circle of light the dash cast on his face. My mouth was dry. I lied and said 10, because small and long felt safer than telling the true number. He made a small sound like he was checking that answer and said, "Okay." When we pulled up to his house, he didn't get out right away. He unzipped his duffel and took out a small pack of playing cards, cheap deck, bent corners, and spread them like someone checking tools. Then he stood, zipped his hoodie past the holster so the gun was hidden again, and walked up to the porch like it had always been his. He never looked back. The van lingered in the street until I pulled away. I sat a long time at the curb with the engine running, hands wide on the wheel. I called dispatch, then my sister, then a friend. My voice felt thin telling them about the holster, the questions, the van. They told me to come in or to call the police. I told dispatch what I remembered, and they said they'd do extra patrols. A week later, an officer called to say they checked that block after other calls and found nothing illegal, that these things happen and they're hard to pin down. He thanked me for calling. That was the official end. For me, it wasn't an end. It was a change. I drove nights for years after that and kept the cash under wrappers in the center console. I started parking where cameras could see. I kept the app up in my window so people could read that my trip was tracked. Small choices. I stopped taking that route. I avoided the streets the van took. The point where it could have turned worse was made of tiny decisions: how quickly I answered, which routes I chose, what I lied about. There was no shouting, no sudden shove, just the slow pressure of questions from someone who happened to be armed and who kept asking exactly what he needed to know. I got out of the car that night and drove home with my hands still shaking and the heater on full. I didn't get hurt. I drove another night after that. The city didn't change its shape. I just learned to watch it differently. I picked him up off a side street where the bars had just coughed out their last people. He looked like a regular late-night rider, hoodie, baseball cap, headphones around his neck, but the way he got in felt sharp, like someone who'd been standing still for a long time and then decided to move. He didn't say hi. He just shut the door and folded his hands and watched the phone mount like it was a screen he needed to study. The app showed a pin that was miles out of the city. I asked if he was sure. He said, "Yeah, just drive." Fine. People went far at night for dumb reasons. I figured this was one of them. We left the main streets and the lights started to thin. He asked once, casually, if I minded routes without highways. I said I didn't mind. He started giving directions under his breath: left here, right there, but he didn't use street names, just landmarks, the old billboard, the church with no steeple, the farm with the rusted tractor. He said these like they were normal things to steer by. I could tell he wasn't local because my GPS lit up whenever he told me to turn and then tried to reroute. He didn't care. He kept watching the windshield like he could see the map better than I could. At first it was just a little weird. Little weird stacked up. He kept adjusting the passenger window an inch and then closing it, as if measuring the air. He would look in the mirror and check my hands like that mattered. He hummed sometimes, but not music, just a soft sound that didn't make sense. The heat in the car felt wrong. I couldn't get comfortable. Every time I glanced at my phone to check the route, his eyes flicked there and then back to the road. That made me feel watched in a way that had nothing to do with him looking at me. We left a ring road. The GPS was still trying to draw the path, but the blue line thinned. The sky opened to fewer lights and the app said no route found, in the way that happens when signal gets fuzzy. I kept driving, following the little dots on the screen and the instructions the passenger whispered. He didn't have a destination in the app, he had a map in his head. The radio cut in and out more and more. There were stretches where you could see nothing but the headlights and the pale faces of trees. A dog barked somewhere and it sounded far away and very close at once, like a sound stretched thin. The passenger asked me to take a right at a gravel driveway and then, 3 minutes later, told me to ignore it. He asked me to go slow over a bridge that had no rail and then told me to speed up when a car passed us going the other way. He changed his mind so often that I stopped being casual about it and started being careful. A few times I thought we were being followed. A dark SUV showed up behind us on a long straight and stayed a steady distance. I turned and the SUV turned. I stopped at a pullout and the SUV stayed behind at a distance like someone watching a show. The passenger didn't look alarmed. He just checked his watch and then looked at me like it wasn't the first time this had happened. That fact was worse than the SUV itself. There was a house with no lights and a porch swing. There was a row of mailboxes with names on them. There was a burnt-out pickup with a tarp over the bed. The passenger pointed and said, "Not here." He said it like a man reciting a grocery list. I wondered if he'd been here before. I wondered if he knew people in the dark places. At one point he asked me to stop at a tiny gas station that had a single hanging light that buzzed. I stopped. The place had a kid behind the counter with acne and a bored way of moving. The passenger didn't get out. He just sat and watched me like he was seeing if I was going to run. A man leaned against the pump smoking and looked at us long enough that he felt like a presence checking our car. I kept the doors locked. The man at the pump lit another cigarette and the three of us existed in that circle of half-light for a minute that stretched. We left again and the dark felt thicker. The passenger tightened his hands once when a deer ran across the road ahead of us. He started asking questions, nothing direct at first. How often I worked nights, if I ever drove this far, if I had ever had a flat tire out here. The question sounded like someone drawing a web and checking whether I would fit. I answered as simply as I could. He was writing something invisible down with every one-syllable reply. When the GPS finally died for good, just a blank gray square with a little spinning wheel, something in my chest went cold. We were on a county road that wasn't on my offline maps. The passenger smiled a little, like someone pleased by how quiet the radio got. He pulled a folded paper map from his backpack and smoothed it on his knee and pointed. "Left here," he said, and the map agreement made him steady. The map confused me. It looked like someone had taken the map of a different state and tried to use it here. I started thinking about the practical things. If something went wrong out here, help was a long time away. My phone still showed 2 bars, but the call to dispatch lagged and dropped once before reconnecting. I told myself to stay calm, to keep the doors locked, to drive to the nearest place with lights. The passenger watched me do that like he was waiting to see which of my plans would be tripped up first. Another car pulled up from a driveway and followed a half-mile behind. Then it turned off. Then it came back. It kept appearing at the edges like a tide. Once it flashed its brights and then turned them off. The passenger's eyes didn't move. He said, casually, "They like to check." I asked who they were. He shrugged and said, "People who don't want strangers around." He didn't explain more. He didn't need to. At some point we rolled down a narrow lane and I could see someone's porch light at the top of a hill. The road narrowed to a single band of gravel. The passenger told me to stop by a fork and told me where to wait. He said he'd get out and walk a short piece. He said it like it was nothing. My mouth tasted cold. I stalled. Maybe I needed gas. Maybe I needed to check a message, and he tapped the back of my seat with 2 fingers, impatient but composed. He touched the leather like someone who had handled tools his whole life. Then he said, slow and casual, "You can come with me if you want." He didn't ask. He offered it like it would be polite. I didn't go. I told him I was fine right there, that I'd wait in the car. He looked at me for a moment with a face that wasn't angry or pleased. It was weighing. Then he nodded and stood up and walked away with that steady gait, shoulders set. He didn't look back until he reached the trees. Then he turned his head in my direction for a second like he was making sure of something and then disappeared between the trunks. Time stretched out into the sound of my own breathing. The dark closed us in. I kept the engine running though I had no idea how long he'd be gone. The tail lights of the other car that had been following were gone. The map in my head pinged at me. What if he didn't come back? What if this was a test to see how I behaved when no one watched? I called dispatch and then hung up because the phone froze on a loading circle. I tried my mother's number and it went to voicemail. He came back about 15 minutes later and walked up like he'd been nowhere at all. He had leaves on his shoes and a small smile. He dumped a pouch of something on the seat between us and said, "All right, now just drive." I looked at him. He looked tired in the way of someone who'd been awake too long and had decided to ignore it. He slid the pouch into his backpack and said, "Turn left at the next gate." I didn't want to turn left at the next gate. The road narrowed and there was a chain stretched across a dirt drive, sagging low. A sheriff's sticker peeled off a mailbox by the fence. It looked like the kind of private stretch people used to keep things away from the world. My hands were shaking, and I thought about the simple gear in my car that could make it impossible to move the engine off, the battery out. I thought about the bloke who'd leaned on the pump and watched. I thought about the car that had been following. I made a choice I still think about in a practical way. I drove past the gate. I kept straight. I drove faster than I should have on gravel, and I kept my lights on full, and I kept my hazard flashers flicking like a beacon. I didn't stop. The passenger's head snapped up. Then he sat back and watched the world slide away. He said nothing for a long time. Finally he said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I kept going until I hit a county road I recognized, and then I drove as directly as I could to a 24-hour diner with a neon sign and a parking lot full of trucks. I parked and sat with the engine running and called the company and 911. The dispatcher told me officers were 30 minutes out. That felt like forever. The passenger stayed in the back seat like he usually did, quiet, hands folded, eyes on the dash. People came out of the diner to smoke and glanced over. The passenger finally opened his door and stepped out slow, like he was done with a joke. He walked to the diner like he belonged there and didn't look back. Police came and took my statement. I told them the roads he'd had me take, the times we stopped, the cars that followed. They took my phone and said they'd pull the GPS records. They asked if I wanted to press charges for coercion. I asked if they found anything in the pouch he'd dropped, and they said they'd check. They drove me home in a patrol car and told me to call if anything else felt wrong. After that I stopped taking rides far out alone. I started parking near cameras. I let the app know if a route looked wrong. The passenger never contacted me again. Weeks later, the company emailed to say they were investigating a pattern of drivers being routed off maps in that county and that they were working with police. I don't know what they found. I don't know if the other car was part of it or if the man in the hoodie was scouting. I know what I did. I kept the doors locked. I drove toward light and people, and I did not get out of the car in the dark with a man who wanted to be somewhere no one else would go. I drove away, and that night I was cold and awake, but I was whole. I was tired in that way you get after 12 hours of other people's nonsense, the kind where your jaw felt loose and your eyelids wanted to fold. The app pinged and I rolled up to a corner where a bar had just emptied out. He came out wearing a soaked jacket, stumbling like he'd lost the map for his feet. Smelled like cheap whiskey and rain, hair plastered to his forehead. He got in without saying hi and slammed the door like it was a signal. At first he was the usual drunk passenger, phone face down, head back, half singing to himself. He kept dipping his hand into his jacket pocket and then pulling it out like he was checking the space under his fingers. Little things stood out right away, the way he didn't buckle his seatbelt even though the city street was full of bumps, the way he traced a ring on the leather with one finger and then licked his thumb like he was tasting the car. It was sloppy and human and a little sticky, and it kept my skin on alert. He told me an address that didn't match the pin in the app. He was slurring but sharp when he corrected me, like he was embarrassed by the first answer. I kept my voice light, the kind of small talk that makes someone feel like the world is ordinary. He didn't want to talk much. He hummed under his breath. He laughed too loud at nothing. Each laugh made the driver part of my brain look up from its tiredness and check the mirrors. We hit a part of town where the lights were dim and the lanes bunched close. A cab clipped past us too fast and a kid on a skateboard nearly rode under my bumper. The passenger's body snapped forward like he'd been pulled by a string. He said, real quiet, "Fucking kids." It felt like an answer to something I hadn't asked. Small weird things stacked up. He kept rubbing his palms like he was trying to warm them. He left a smear of something sticky on the center console that I noticed when his hand rested on it. He kept glancing over his shoulder at the windows as if checking for faces outside. Once he pointed at the rear view and said, "You watch M?" I said, "Watch what?" and he shrugged as if it didn't matter. I realized he meant other cars, people in back seats, shadows. The idea of being watched by someone who wasn't shouting about it made my neck prickle. The radio cut in and out. The heater made this faint metallic tick when it changed speeds, and that little click sounded like a clock. A bus stopped and left this long hollow drag of air in its wake. The passenger kept tapping the mount where my phone sat, not hard, just a rhythm, like drumming on a memory. It made me focus on my hands on the wheel and the way they could be noticed. He asked me to take a detour down a narrower road that I normally avoided. He said he knew a shortcut. I didn't like it, but sometimes people wanted back alleys to puke in or quick ways home. I took the road. The pavement changed to uneven bricks and the streetlights were fewer. His voice slid into something lower, more certain. He started making suggestions: faster here, slower there, like a pilot giving course corrections. Then the first real sign that this wasn't just a drunk guy being annoying. He tried to grab the wheel. It wasn't a hard grab the first time. He leaned forward from the back seat and wrapped a hand around the left side and pulled, just enough to turn the wheel a little. The car drifted towards the curb. I corrected with short movements and told him to sit back. He laughed like he'd found something funny and said, "Step on it, man. Step on it." It sounded like a dare. It sounded like someone playing a game. I told him no, told him to get off the wheel. He pushed his hand deeper like the first push didn't count. He smelled stronger now, like mouthwash layered over whiskey. His words slurred into threats, not full sentences, just sharp edges. I said, "Step on it, don't make me," that kind of thing that sits in the middle of a sentence and shows the rest later. I tried the calm voice. I told him I couldn't, that taking the wheel was dangerous. I told him I'd pull over. He didn't care. He leaned harder and now both hands were on the rim, and he twisted with this drunk force that had no rhythm. My chest tightened. We were in a narrow lane with parked cars and a dog walker up ahead. I kept my foot steady and used small, controlled movements, keeping the car pointed straight. My hands were on the wheel fighting with someone who smelled like a bar and was twice my anchor. "Step on it," he said again, and this time his voice cut through the car like a metal edge. He reached around and put his palm on my knee, hard, as if to prove he could hold me. My own knee twitched at the touch and my mouth went dry. My first real thought was stupid and useless: don't flip the car. My second thought was to breathe and slow my hands. I tried to open the door to get him out. It was locked. I kept it locked on purpose. He'd reached his other hand toward the lock and banged it with his fist, laughing that broken laugh. The horn felt too far to press without removing a hand from the wheel, and I didn't want to take the risk. My phone was mounted, but in the way panic makes decisions go, my thumb hovered and forgot to hit the emergency button. I remember the app had an emergency option that sent my location, so with my left knee and the steering wheel between us, I fumbled for the pocket where my phone charger lived and hit the little button on the screen with my thumb. I kept my voice flat and said, "Hey, calm down." I told him I'd pull into the next well-lit place. He barked something that might have been a laugh and then a threat. He said if I didn't do what he said and he didn't finish it because he didn't need to. I eased the car toward a strip of light I had seen a block back, a 24-hour grocery with one lone security light. I kept my foot light and steered in small clips. He tightened his grip on the wheel like he was trying to merge his hands with mine. The car trembled because he gripped hard enough to send tiny shocks up the steering column. At the curb, someone had left a cart and a guy was smoking and looking at his phone. I rolled in slow and pointed the headlights at the front doors like I was asking for attention. The passenger started to swear and pound the wheel, and then, suddenly, he let go. He slumped back in the seat and breathed like he'd been holding his breath for a long time. For a second, I didn't know if he'd just passed out or if he was winding up a new plan. I didn't move. I kept the engine idling and I kept my hands on the wheel like they were anchors. A woman came out of the store with a bag and walked right up to my window, which I had cracked, and asked if I needed help. I told her no, voice thin, and she went back in and called someone on her phone. She did not leave. Then another man on a smoking break walked over and stood by the curb with his jacket collar turned up. They both watched. The passenger started coughing, a wet, embarrassed cough, and then he puked once into the bag he had in his lap. It was gross and small and human, and it made the situation feel closer to something salvageable. He wiped his mouth with his sleeve and said, to no one, "Sorry." His voice looked small when it said that. I called 911. I told them that a passenger had grabbed the wheel, that I was parked outside the store, that I didn't feel safe moving. They told me officers would be there fast. The passenger, now quieter, kept saying "step on it" under his breath like it was a song. 2 patrol cars pulled in maybe 10 minutes later. The cops were professional, calm, which made everything seem more sensible. They opened my door and asked for a version of the night, and I told it, everything about the way he'd leaned, the way he'd smelled, the way he pounded the wheel. They checked him for alcohol, they asked him questions, and he answered most of them in a slurry of words that didn't make sense. They took him across the lot, put him in the back of a cruiser, and told me I could call if I remembered anything else. People who had been smoking drifted back to their phones and their conversations. The security light hummed. The grocery staff gave me a free coffee because my hands were shaking. After that, I added extra safety checks to everything: doors locked, app open on the dash, emergency contacts set. It wasn't because the cops said I should, it was because I wanted a list of small things to do so I wouldn't be back in that car with a hand on my knee and a voice telling me to step on it. I drove home slow that night, radio off, looking at mirrors like they were names. The city didn't change, but the ways people could get in each other's cars did. I kept driving. I didn't get hurt. I got smarter about the little choices that kept me that way. I picked him up off a long, empty street where the last of the dinner lights had gone out. The app gave a house way outside town, mansion the map said in small letters, and I thought, okay, long ride, easy money. He climbed in carrying an old leather bag and a paper grocery bag that crinkled when he put it down. He had a clean shirt under a jacket and his hair was wet like he'd been under a sprinkler. He didn't say much. He told me an address, and then, when I started to drive, He kept watching the road like he was counting the lamps. At first it was normal late night stuff. The highway was quiet, radio under the hum. He asked if I minded the scenic route. I said I didn't care. He gave directions and landmarks past the twisted oak. Don't take the bridge with the white railing, and they sounded oddly specific, like he'd memorized a path for a different reason. He pointed out things like a neighbor's wind chimes that were missing a chime and a mailbox dented on the same side every year. Little details nobody thinks about unless they drive the road a lot. We passed farm fields, a cluster of trailers, and a lone gas station that shut at midnight. The sky felt huge out there. It made the headlights look like islands. He kept folding and refolding a receipt from his pocket, the paper rubbing the same crease over and over. I found myself noticing small things, the way his fingertips were stained, a faint smell of bleach under the smell of cigarettes, the way he watched my hands on the wheel as if trying to learn the rhythm of them. We turned down a long tree-lined drive framed by pillars and a gate that looked like it belonged in a period movie. The gate was open, which is why I didn't think twice. The mansion sat back a half-mile on a rise, stone walls lit with yellow pools from hidden lamps. It was the kind of house you don't see much unless someone writes a check for it. The man said wait before he turned and looked at me straight and said, "Don't go anywhere. Wait here." He had that small, steady tone people use when they mean it. I killed the engine and the car sounded loud in the hush. There was a near-perfect silence out there, the kind where every small noise stood out. And I'll called once and then nothing. The man got out and walked up the path and I watched him go under the wide porch light, his bag swinging. He didn't look back. The gate swung shut behind him. It didn't slam. It closed with a single slow metal sigh, like a mouth closing. For a second I thought he had hit some remote and it would pop open again. He didn't come back. I called out his name because that's the dumb thing you do when you want someone to turn around in a movie. Nothing. I tried the app call. Rang, went to voicemail. I tried his number, it went straight to an automated not available voice. The little blue dot that shows your ride's progress was a dot on the map a half-mile away, and the road back to the main street was a long thin line. My phone's bars slid from 3 to 2 to 1 and then the spinning wheel showed the network was weak. There was a small keypad at the gate, a flicker of letters and a tiny camera lens. I leaned out, breathed cold air, and pressed the speaker button like a tourist. Nothing. No chime, no voice, just the soft hum of the lamps and the metal under my palms. I tapped the camera lens with my finger, because sometimes these things do something if you poke them, and it didn't even seem to blink. I walked a little way up the drive because walking felt like doing something. Gravel crunched under my shoes and sounded like someone stepping rhythmically. The house seemed huge, all windows dark except for a light over the front door where the man had disappeared. I could see movement in one of the windows at the side, a shadow passing by like the house was alive but unwilling to come to the window. I kept calling back to the gate. I shouted the man's name until my throat went rough. Nothing. I tried the gate phone again. It either had no line or no answer. I couldn't tell which. I called Uber support and the start of being official made my stomach drop into a new place. The app said it would try to contact the rider. It said it would give me route directions home if I wanted them. That felt like an option inside a locked box. I told the support rep that the gate closed and that I couldn't leave. He said he would notify local ops and that sometimes properties have codes. He suggested I could wait. Wait where? The car felt small and echoey with the engine off. Shadows moved in the hedges. Time stretched. The mansion's lamps clicked off one by one. The owls had that old-timer way of going to bed slowly, lights dimming like a town dying by inches. A window on the second floor darkened and then another, until looking at it felt like watching a set of eyes close. The gate light remained on, square and pale, like it was a sentinel. The shadow that had passed by the side window didn't come back. I figured maybe they'd left the gate closed on purpose for privacy. Maybe they thought I'd be gone in 2 minutes. Maybe they'd tell me later, sorry, we forgot. Those little maybes were as thin as tissue. I watched the driveway from behind my windshield and kept thinking about the way he'd folded the receipt. The bag he had carried was heavy enough to dent the paper grocery sack. I kept picturing what could be inside. A bottle, clothes, tools, nothing jumped out as obvious. And yet the fact that he had left the gate closed and hadn't come back made my fingers tingle. I tried opening the car door once, to walk up the path again, and realized I was doing the same ritual over and over, like the car would suddenly be different if I did one more time. I didn't want to leave the car unless I had someone with me. I tried calling 911. Signal was a sliver. The call connected long enough for the operator to say dispatching and then dropped. My heartbeat got loud. I kept calling the rider's number and kept getting the same dead voice. I tried the keypad at the gate again and connected to the same nothing. The mansion had swallowed the ordinary ways of talking. After an hour, I could feel the shape of the night in my bones. I started the engine because standing still felt like being watched through the glass by eyes that could not be friendly. I took a slow drive back to the end of the driveway and then stopped where the gate was solid metal and there was no remote in reach. I thought about backing the car up and forcing the gate. I thought about how gates can be damaged and how that would be a mess of liability and the kind of thing cops write reports about. I had to choose, call and wait with a car that might be trapped for hours, or go look for help the long way around. I drove back to the road and headed for the signal. My phone flashed, full bars, like it had been asleep. I called 911 and told them everything. They asked for the address, the details, and if anyone was in immediate danger. I said I didn't know. I told them the gate had closed and the rider had gone in and didn't answer. They said they'd send someone. They also told me to stay put until officers arrived, which made me feel pinned. Officers were 20 minutes out. That felt like forever. I went back to the gate and waited in the car. The beams from a cruiser finally cut across the drive like a hand reaching. 2 officers got out, walked up to the gate, and pressed the intercom. A man's voice came through, flat and polite. "Hello?" The officers asked the name of the rider. The voice stilled. Then a woman's voice answered and said the rider had come in for a private dinner and that she was sorry for the inconvenience, that someone had shut the gate for the baby and they'd been distracted. It sounded rehearsed. They asked to see identification for the house. The woman behind the intercom didn't give a name. She said someone would check. After a couple of minutes, the gate opened, the first slit of metal yawning like a mouth, and the mansion's lights flicked on until it looked almost awake again. A man walked out on the porch and said he'd been a little worried because the power had gone out earlier. He had a small paper towel in his hand and apologized for the trouble. He looked like someone who had been reading. The officer asked me a few more questions and told me to drive safe and maybe take a break. I sat there with the coffee they handed me because my hands were still shaking. The rider never came back to the car. He never called. He had gone into a house with a gate that closed behind him, and for an hour I had been a thing watched by a property and a silence that didn't answer. The officers said they'd follow up. Later the company messaged me that the rider had been verified by the mansion staff and that everything was fine. That reply didn't fix the way the night had shaped me, the way every unblinking camera lens looks like an eye, the way a closed gate felt like a sentence. I drove home slow, windows down, listening to little evening noises and searching for the ordinary sounds I had expected in a normal night. I didn't know what had been in the man's bag or why he left without a word, but I knew one thing: when a place is built to keep people out, it keeps even simple answers behind steel. I locked my door when I got home and lay awake for a long time thinking about pillars and gates and the way the dark can feel full of people who don't want you to leave. I picked up a ping off a side street near a college bar district on a Friday night because those rides paid decent and the shift was almost over. The app showed a small house icon and a name I didn't recognize. I pulled up in a kid. That was my first thought. Kid came out in shorts even though it was cold, a hoodie, a backpack with a cartoon patch sewn crooked on. He climbed in and slammed the door like he'd been running. He didn't say hi. He smelled like cheap beer and the kind of breath that makes your own mouth suddenly dry. His voice was high when he finally spoke, the kind that hasn't settled into anything yet. He told me a street name that was far out of the city. I thought maybe he didn't want parents to know where he was going. That happens. I tapped the NAV and started driving. For the first 10 minutes I treated it like any other night, music low, app on, fuel light in the corner of my head. But then little things started to stack up in a way that made my skin crawl after a while. He kept glancing at his phone, thumb hovering, not typing. He fidgeted with the straps of his backpack like he was trying to hide something inside it. Once he sat back and for a full minute watched my hands on the wheel like he was studying them. Small stuff, nothing on its own. He flinched at a siren in the distance and then laughed too loud and said, "They never come." I didn't know what he meant. He had that tight smile people put on when they're pretending they don't care. His ears were red, like he'd been outside in the cold for a long time. I glanced at the clock past 1 in the morning and thought, maybe he's simply too young to be out this late. It clicked for me in the way a small thing suddenly looks bigger. His voice had a softness and a register I recognized from dropping my niece at school years ago. The hoodie had a school logo on the cuff in faded thread. He had a hospital wristband still on his wrist, not fresh but folded and creased. When he answered my casual question about school, he said, "I go," and then stopped himself. He looked down at his hands like he'd been caught doing something private. I tried not to make a big thing of it. Drivers are told not to accuse people of being minors out loud, for a lot of reasons. I kept the tone neutral and asked him casually, "You sure you're good to head that far?" He looked at me with real panic in his eyes for the first time and said, "Please don't take me there." He spoke so fast his words tumbled. "Not my parents. Not home. They'll freak." That flipped everything. He lowered his voice and said that he'd left a party and some people started fighting, that he didn't want to be dropped at home because he'd have to explain and he'd get in trouble. My training, whatever little I had, said if someone so young is asking not to be taken home, the safest place is to get them to a public well-lit spot and call for help. The app had an emergency call feature. I had my hazard light rules memorized. But my stomach went cold because the law and the company rules are a maze when a minor is involved. I asked him, quietly, "How old are you?" He looked away. He didn't answer. His knee bounced like he was about to stand up. He kept comparing every cross street to not my street and not my house, and when I asked where he actually wanted to go, he shrugged and said, "Anywhere but there." Little red flags multiplied: the wristband, the patch, the way he hesitated at anywhere. I told him I shouldn't take someone his age on a long trip without a guardian. It came out clumsy. I tried to make it sound like a policy, not a judgment. He started to panic in a new way then, not loud, but a tightening you feel in the back of your neck. He kept looking at the back window like he'd expect someone to appear there any second. He whispered, "Please, just drive. Don't make me go back. There are rules, and then there is the human thing." I did the human thing. I set the NAV for the nearest 24-hour hospital because they sit open and have staff who know how to handle minors. I told him that if he wanted money for a cab later I could help with that I could wait. He grabbed my wrist like he needed proof and said, "Just go. Please." The grip was small but hard. We drove in a quiet tunnel of houses and then out onto a bypass where the streetlights were spaced wide. My phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number asking if this was my car, and my heart did that stupid thing that makes your throat tight. I glanced in the rear view. He was looking straight ahead, hands fisted on his knees. His breathing was shallow. He had the look of someone who'd made a decision and was trying to keep from changing it. Traffic made the trip take longer. A truck came up in the next lane and gave a long, slow honk that felt aimed. The kid's head snapped toward the window like something in his body expected that sound to mean something. Once, when we paused at a light, a woman on the sidewalk paused and looked at us for too long, more than an accidental glance. She mouthed, "Are you okay?" And I forced a smile and shrugged like it was nothing. At the hospital drop-off, the lights were warm and there were people around. I pulled up and told him we could go in, that the staff would help. He shook his head and said, "No hospital. They'll call my parents. I'll die." His voice hitched. He sounded like a kid who'd been scolded once too many times. He reached into his backpack, took out a folded paper and emergency contact maybe, and then shoved it back in like it burned. He said, "Please, please." I'd never seen grown panic so small and precise. I locked the car doors because I'd read stories and been told to be careful. He kept trying to open his door and then stopping, like he couldn't decide whether to get out. My hands were wet. I kept them on the wheel because somehow the metal felt like an answer you could hold. After a minute more, he finally stepped out, looked around, and then came back and sat down. He said, "If you take me anywhere, they'll make me tell them. They'll find them." He kept saying they like a shadow. So I did what felt right and what I thought was safe. I drove to the nearest police station instead. The officers there were used to late-night kids with drinks and bad choices. I explained on the way in that I had a passenger who didn't want to go home and seemed underage. He was quiet in the back seat the whole time. At the police station, the lights were harsh and fluorescent, and the desks looked like they needed more pins. An officer came out, took a look at him, asked a few questions, and then spoke with me privately. The kid's posture folded when the officer asked him his name. He looked toward a corner and said, "I just needed a minute." I got scared. The officer asked him to answer basic questions. He gave his name, his age, 16. That put me in a kind of frozen relief and fear. The officer told me I'd done the right thing bringing him there and that they'd handle it. They offered me coffee and asked me to wait while they sorted it. I sat in a folding chair and watched the kid through the glass like something fragile that had been dropped. I expected that to be the end. The paper police report would note why I'd brought him in. They'd mark the ride as ended, and I would go back to the car and head home. Instead, it was the beginning of something that started small and then became a weight. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with an official email. An allegation of misconduct had been filed against me. The subject line said, "Immediate action required." My stomach dropped. The complaint said the rider's parent claimed I'd taken their child on a long ride without consent and that I had made inappropriate advances and touched the minor. That last line felt like a physical blow. It wasn't true. He had clutched my wrist in the car. I had not touched him in any way beyond holding the wheel. The wording of the complaint was the kind that pulls the rug out from under you. I called the company's support line until a human picked up, and then I sat on hold because the automated voice wanted to connect me to the right department. The representative was polite and careful. He said an investigation would start and that my account would be temporarily deactivated pending review. Deactivated. Overnight, I lost bookings and money. The app put a gray flag on my profile. People saw the flag in forums. Rumors do a fast job. The first officer who took the kid's report had written that I acted responsibly. I had the timestamp trip info and the police station's name. I made screenshots of the GPS route and the messages where I told the kid I intended to take him to a safe place. The company asked for everything: messages, trip logs, any dash cam I had. I didn't have a dash cam. Too many drivers didn't. I had my memory in the app's trail, but it felt thin against the parents' accusation. There were no witnesses in the car, only the kid and me and the officer who'd seen us at the station, and the parents' complaint said the kid had been traumatized by some contact. The investigation probed. A woman from the company called and asked me to describe the ride step by step in a tone that made me watch my own words like they might hurt me. I answered honestly, picking up at the bar street, the kid's clothing, the hospital idea, the police station, the officer's name. She asked if I'd touched him. I said no. Minutes later she asked what made me think he was underage. I said the wristband, the voice, the patch on his backpack. They wrote everything down. Each recorded answer felt like piling wood on a slow-burning fear. The parent filed a police report too. That turned the company's investigation into a legal one. Detectives called me and asked hard, clinical questions about where my hands were in the car, whether I had asked about his age, whether I'd done anything that could be misread. They wanted exact phrasing. I tried to be exact. Memories are messy. You remember the taste more than the words. I found myself replaying every nuance of shaking hands and small silences and the way the kid had grabbed my wrist. The more I replayed it, the more the scene looked like something in a courtroom, trimmed and sharp. My neighbor at the dispatch yard chewed me out for not having a dash cam. You know how fast they pin people these days, he said, like he was telling me a fact. The company said they'd expedite things. Days turned into a week. The kid's parents said he was deeply shaken and listed a string of words that read like anger. The police thanked me for my cooperation but told me to expect more calls. And then came the worst part, being temporarily suspended from the platform until everything was resolved. The app that had been my lifeline went quiet and cold, and I watched my bank balance and tried not to swallow it. People around me said dumb things like, "You must have done something." Privacy and presumption vanish fast when fear does its work. I had to explain myself to friends, to supervisors, to the man at the cafe who'd known me for years. I started to understand how quickly a life you take for granted can spin out on the smallest thing. The investigation wound through for about a month. They checked my route logs and timestamps and the police log from the station where I had dropped the kid. That officer had written in the report that the kid had been 16 and that I had brought him to the station voluntarily and without incident. That 3-line sentence turned out to be the anchor. The detectives interviewed the hospital staff, the night clerk, the patrol officers who arrived. They found no evidence of physical contact beyond the kid's clinging to my wrist, which the kid later said he couldn't remember doing because he'd been so scared. Memory, as the detectives pointed out, is unreliable. In the end, they cleared me. The company's final email said the allegation was unsubstantiated and my account was reinstated. The police closed their case. The kid's family withdrew from following up. That was the official end. The ride logs and the officer's note had been enough to show I had done what I could to get him to safety. But clear didn't feel like a bell that rang and washed the whole thing away. The suspension had hit my income. The complaint sat in a file somewhere. I lost a week of work, and for a while after, every time a kid climbed in the back seat, I watched their hands and the way they moved like I was a man waiting for trouble. I felt watched. I felt like the world expected a single misstep. I learned a few things. Always keep a rough camera, even a cheap one you strap to the dash. Keep the app's emergency features practiced in your thumb. Call the police station before you leave with a minor if you can. Take receipts and screenshots, and if there is an officer present, get their name. None of those things felt heroic. They felt like small rules to survive. A month later, I picked up the same bar district shift because life asked for money and the app pinged. I pulled up to the curb and a student tucked into the back with a hoodie and a backpack with a patch. I did what I'd learned. Lights on, app visible, route in the screen, And when he said a far address, I asked very plainly and calm, "Are you over 18?" He answered yes and kept his voice even. The ride was normal. I handed him a paper receipt at the end and tucked my hands on the wheel because it was a small victory. I was cleared, but for a long time I drove like a man who had been through a test. The memory of that night stayed in the small ways I checked my mirrors and the specific time I let the cops know before doors opened. The city kept moving and people kept getting into cars and asking to go places. I kept driving, and in a way that's the part of the story that mattered the most. I drove on, and I learned to hold the car like a small, private room where whatever happens is worth documenting and protecting, both for the person in the back and for myself. He got in, and before I could say hello, he started listing things like he was reading a grocery list. "Your address is 28 Maple. You leave at 7. Your wife's name is Jen. The kids are Maya and Luke. Maya catches the 7:15 bus. Luke goes to daycare at Sunny Steps." He didn't stop. He said it like it was nothing, flat and steady, like reciting the time. For a second I thought he was joking. People pull weird stuff sometimes. I laughed and said, "Okay," and he smiled small and kept going. The color of my front door, the dent in my mailbox, the way I put the laundry hamper against the washer. He told me the name of my daughter's teacher and the brand of cereal my son won't eat. He spoke like he had been in my house. My skin went tight. The stereo didn't feel loud enough. The heater hummed and the whole car felt like a glass box. I asked him how he knew, light voice, because that was the only way my mouth would move. He shrugged and said, "I noticed. You make the same path a lot." He looked too young to be rehearsing names. He had a clean jacket and steady hands. He smelled like the bus stop, cold air, and the faint metal tang of a commuter. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a person who had watched too closely and gone soft in the middle of it. I kept driving because everything about the cab of the car felt fragile. The app was running, the route visible, the little blue dot moving. I told him I didn't like strangers knowing so much and asked him to explain. He said, "I didn't think you'd notice. People don't notice. You should lock the side gate." He pointed at the passenger side window as if I kept it open at home. The way he said it made me imagine my back door on a slow click. Small things piled up. He didn't answer my stupid jokes. He would watch the rear view like it was a screen and then study the map for a long time. He tapped the dash with a fingernail twice, not loud, the sound a little metallic tap that sat in my chest. Once, when a delivery truck parked too close and the driver cursed, the passenger said under his breath, "He parks there because he doesn't like you," and laughed like it was a detail I should appreciate. At a light, someone on the sidewalk paused and stared at our car. The guy held his phone up a second like he was filming. He didn't wave. He just watched. I caught the rider watching him watch. His head turned with this calm speed like he expected it. That look made the whole back mirror feel like a lens. I asked again where he wanted to go and he named a place 2 towns over. It wasn't on my normal routes. He corrected the pin without looking at the screen and said, "You'll see why." He kept telling me things about my routine, which bus stop I used in the mornings, how I pulled into the driveway backwards so the kids could get out the passenger side, as if the facts were currency. Every fact pressed a little more. I thought about calling the police. I didn't call right away because I wasn't sure this met the bar for calling. He hadn't said he'd do anything. He hadn't threatened. He was too calm. Being calm is the thing that makes you not trust someone, I realized. He had answers for everything. "You look tired," he said. He told me where I kept the spare change. When I told him I didn't keep much cash, he said, "No, not cash. You sign for things sometimes. It tells you more than you think." At a gas station, he asked to step out for a cigarette. He folded one hand into his jacket like he was reaching for change, and when he straightened he had a little paper with my last name on it. He hadn't used it. He just smoothed it and folded it again and put it back like it belonged there. I watched him through the mirror, and the paper sat like proof. When he came back and he sat down and said, "I saw the kids yesterday." Maya was carrying a red backpack and she dropped a sticker on the curb. "You didn't see. You wouldn't." He said it like he had been saving it for a good time. I felt a cold line under my ribs, stupid animal alarm. My mouth was dry. I told him, flat, that knowing things wasn't okay. I told him to stop. He looked at me like someone who had read a fact in a book and decided it wasn't interesting until someone else acknowledged it. "You always park in front of the grocery on Maple on Tuesdays," he said. "You take the kids out at 6:50 and you put Luke in the car first." He had me in the voice of a stranger who could tell me how to live. I pulled over under a streetlight because it felt like the right thing. The light buzzed and made a little skin-crawling sound. I said, "Get out." It came out sharper than I planned. He didn't move. He said, "Before you call anyone, know this." He leaned forward in this casual way and told me the exact day my daughter lost her tooth and how she cried because she thought she'd swallowed it. He knew the freckle on my son's shoulder from a summer rash, a thing I'd never told anyone. I could feel my hands shaking. I wanted to get out of the car, to go home, to lock the door and count the kids and check all the windows. But I couldn't leave the car with someone who had memorized my family. I pictured walking to the nearest house and explaining, "A stranger knows my kids' names and the brand of cereal they hate." It felt ridiculous and also urgent. I reached for my phone. As my thumb hit the emergency button on the app, the passenger lunged forward, hand reaching for the screen. He wasn't panicking. He was quick and practiced. He tried to slide the phone out of my hand glove style, like he'd done it before. I yanked it back. It wasn't a fight. It was a careful, tense tug. He said, Don't call them." His voice was low and suddenly it had weight. I hit 911 with my other hand. The operator asked where I was. I told her my street and my name and that a man in my car knew my kids' names. I kept my voice steady for her, but inside everything was a drum. The passenger watched the phone, then the rear view, then the sidewalk. He didn't yell. He didn't move fast enough to be seen as a threat by anyone else. But he made the whole world compress. He said, "You should let me help you." He said it like he offered a household tip. "There are people that watch for you so you don't have to worry." He smiled as if we were agreeing on something small. I felt like someone who had uncovered a basement and found step after step going down. I was suddenly aware of every camera lens on every corner in the block, the gray box on the light pole, the doorbell cameras in the row of houses, the little square of the delivery guy's phone out in the open. I thought if I could just get to a place with a lot of people, we'd be okay. "Drive to the police station," I told him. I kept my eyes on his face in the mirror. He nodded like I'd asked him to check the time. "No," he said. "Not there. Go to the park. Park near the playground. They won't expect that." That was the line. He wanted to pick where people couldn't help, where the routine of days shifted to loose shadows. I said no. I put the car in gear and turned hard toward the station. He didn't fight physically. He only watched. His jaw worked like he was chewing the choices. When I turned into the well-lit parking lot of the station, he stood up slow and walked out as if he'd been taking a stroll. He didn't run. He didn't make a scene. He walked across the asphalt like someone finishing a circuit. The officers took his name and asked a lot of the same questions I'd been asking in my head. They asked him why he knew things about my family. He shrugged and said he liked to watch people. They asked him where he'd been sleeping and if he'd been following me. He said, I was around. With that vague answer, they held him for a bit, ran a check, and then let him sit in a room with a small window. They asked me if I wanted to press charges. I didn't want to be the guy who didn't understand the law. The sergeant told me they would keep an eye on him and that they'd check nearby camera feeds to see where he'd been. They took my statement and my phone log. The passenger sat on a bench under institutional light and looked tiny and patient. When the sergeant came back, his face was steady. He said they had found a notebook in the suspect's backpack with my address and the kids' names written in it, and that the man had a dozen small notes with other neighbors' habits. They called it stalking. They said they'd contact my house and tell my wife and ask her to change routines. They said they'd try to get him off the street for a while. The officers were kind in a way that made me feel stupid for crying, but cry anyway. They walked me out to the car and told me to go home, to lock the doors, to call if anything else happened. On the ride home, I didn't look at the mirrors. My phone buzzed from an unknown number and I didn't answer. I parked the car in the driveway, unbuckled, and stood in the cold while my wife popped the porch light and opened the door. We talked with the kids and called the school's office and the daycare and told them what happened. They said they'd be careful and they put an alert in the files. The officer called later to say the man had been charged with stalking because of the notes and the way he'd followed people. The court would decide how long he'd be kept away. After that, I changed things. I stopped leaving the grocery bag under the sink. I added cameras. I told the kids not to talk about our small rituals, and they were good at it, fast and serious like kids can be. I kept a list in my glove compartment of everyone who knows where we are, neighbors, family, and I told the app to share trips with my wife. You don't think about your life like a list until someone reads it back to you. He'd been polite about it in that voice of his, but he picked the little details out like knives. The worst part wasn't that he knew my address or the kids' names. The worst part was how casual he was about it, like he thought everyone should be open to someone watching. The police said we were safe for now. The court would set orders and maybe he would be far enough. I slept with the bedroom light on that night and checked the doors twice. The next morning I walked the kids to the bus and watched them go. I kept my head up and looked for strangers who knew too much. I picked him up near the subway stop because the app pinged and I was tired enough to take anything that came up. He climbed in like he was trying not to touch anything, careful, polite, like he was still cleaning his hands in his pockets. He had a hoodie pulled up even though it wasn't cold, and when he sat he kept his backpack on, straps tight. He didn't say much, just an address that was way out in the dark part of town. His voice was small. At first he was the kind of quiet you tune out. He stared at the map, then at the rear view like he was checking where we'd been. Little things settled under my skin. He kept tapping one spot on the canvas of the backpack like he was counting stitches. His hands were fast and their movements didn't match his breathing. Once he cleared his throat and it sounded wet and quick, I thought maybe he had a cough. We were on the highway when he finally spoke without looking at me. "Do you mind if I open the window?" he asked. I said it was fine, and the air came in, smell of wet pavement and an old car's exhaust. He kept glancing over his shoulder at the back window, and when a car followed a little too close he didn't just notice, he flinched as if he'd been punched. He said, "Lo, not them," like that explained everything, but he didn't say who them were. Small things kept stacking. He kept his phone face down and it buzzed once and he flinched so hard he almost dropped it. He had a smear on one sleeve that looked, at first, like dirt but was the wrong color, darker, like a bruise or a dried stain. He touched it and his hand came away a little pink on the tip. He wiped it on his knee and kept his face turned out the window. We took a back road because he wanted it. The city lights thinned and the radio fuzzed. The The map showed a straight line of highway and then an empty blob where the address was. He kept looking at the map, nugget of a smile on the corner of his mouth like he was searching for something on a page. Every time I glanced at him, he looked like a different person, like he was trying on calm. When we hit the red light at the intersection by the old plaza, he braced both hands on the backpack and said, out of nowhere, "Hold up." His fingers dug into the fabric like he wanted to make sure it couldn't move. The light turned and we rolled forward, and I glanced in the mirror because he'd moved. That was when he jumped. He didn't open the door and slip out. He lurched up, swung one leg out, and bolted across the intersection before the crosswalk sign even changed. The door slammed and the sound made me jump. For a second, everything else froze: the cars, the light, the small rain on the glass. He ran toward the dark between the shops, arms pumping, hoodie up, and a couple of people on the sidewalk called something like "hey," but no one chased him. I sat there, heart thudding, the engine idling. My door was still closed. My hands were on the wheel. In the passenger footwell, the backpack lay where he dropped it. I remember the exact way the straps fell, one curl like a coil. There was a small wet smear on the top flap. I reached with a slow, stupid care, like moving something that might crack, and grabbed it by the handle. The stain was darker than coffee, patchy and glistening. It smelled faintly metallic, like pennies or a cut finger. I didn't move the bag out onto the street. My first thought was the wrong one, to chase him, and I caught myself because chasing across wet asphalt at night felt like the wrong scene to play in someone else's story. I kept the doors locked. I hit the hazard lights to attract attention and dialed 911 with my knee because my hands felt suddenly slippery. The operator sounded far away in the little speaker. I told her exactly where I was and that a passenger had bolted and left a bag that looked like it had blood on it. She asked me if I was safe. I said yes, but my voice wasn't solid. She told me to stay put and that officers were on the way. I called the company support too, because the ride was still open on the app and the rider's fare had to be canceled and they might want a statement. People stared from the sidewalks. A guy with a cigarette stood under the awning of the pizza place and watched. Someone took a phone out at the bus stop and pointed it toward the bag like they'd seen something new to film. A woman with a baby carriage muttered into the phone and walked away quicker than she had come. The plaza's neon sign hummed like a neighbor who couldn't sleep. I kept the bag close to my feet with my shoe brace next to it. Inside the plastic loop of the zipper there was a small wet smear on the material, as if a red thing had been dragged along. I could see a bright shard of something through one pocket, bright like the edge of metal. I didn't stick my hand in. I wasn't a cop. I wasn't a hero. I was a driver. I called it out loud to myself to make my hand steady. The officers pulled up quick. 2 cruisers and a van, lights off when they arrived, like they wanted people to come to them rather than them making a show. The first officer came right up to the window and asked me to roll it down. I did, which felt like agreeing to be examined. He asked me to tell him everything. I told him the part about the flinch at the follow car, the way the kid had clutched the bag, the smear on the sleeve. He looked at me the way an officer looks when the pieces fit a pattern they've seen too many times. They took the bag and put it in gloves and sealed it in a plastic evidence sheet until forensic could come. They asked if I'd touched anything. I had. My shoe had nudged the strap, and I gave that to them in case it mattered. They canvassed the area. A security camera above the storefronts caught the man running into the alley behind the shops, and one of the officers started kicking through the lamplight with a flashlight like a dog looking for a scent. While they worked, people circled and talked in tiny waves. A teenager at the bus stop said, "I saw him. He looked like he was being chased, like it was a fact that made whatever had happened more explainable." Another woman said, "No, he looked like he wanted to get away." The air felt full of an argument that didn't include me. The detective who showed up smelled like coffee and old paper. He asked a few of the same questions and then a few different ones. He asked if I'd noticed any people around the alley. I said a dark sedan had lingered too long behind us earlier, at the light. He scribbled and said they check license plate readers and cameras on the highway. He told me to wait because they'd want a statement. I sat in the car and thumbed the steering wheel to keep from touching the bag again. They found the runner. It wasn't far alleyways in that part of town or a patchwork. A witness down the street had seen him cut through a yard and called it in. An officer brought him back in cuffs, looking small and out of breath, hoodie soaked at the sleeves. He was alive and breathing, and that was a thing I both wanted and resented. Wanted because I didn't want someone hurt in the street, and resented because his presence meant the night would not end. They put him in a separate cruiser and read him his rights. He didn't seem like he had planned to hurt anyone, which made everything heavier for me because the bag had evidence that suggested something else. When the forensics tech unzipped the backpack and put the inner lining under a lamp, the little clinic kit inside, gauze, a small bottle with a label, a roll of tape, made it look more like he'd been trying to stop something than to start it. The tech's face stayed flat, but you could tell the pieces were knitting together in his head. They asked the man what happened. He said he'd been attacked down the street, tried to run, and dropped the bag. He had cuts on his hands and a bruise on his temple. He kept looking at me when he talked, like he wanted me to agree. My head was full of small images, the smear on his sleeve, the look when a car had passed, and every scrap didn't make a clean picture. It stayed like a jigsaw with a few pieces missing. The detective later told me the bag had blood and they called the medical examiner. He said the man was a victim of an assault and they were trying to find the suspect. Later that night, the news blared a short piece about a man found with injuries and a separate report of a stabbing a mile away. I didn't watch the rest because my hands kept finding the steering wheel like a raft. They let me go after my statement. The officer who drove me to the precinct's lobby told me to lock my doors and watch my app history for any weird messages. He said they'd check cameras and look for the other car that may have been following. I felt like an eyewitness and a thing under a microscope both. On the ride home, I kept glancing at every pond of light, every shadow at the curb. The world looked like a place you could get held to if you noticed something. A week later, the department emailed me to say the suspect had been charged in connection with the assault and that my bag had been cataloged as evidence. They thanked me for staying. I kept staring at that sentence because it felt both true and wrong. I hadn't wanted to be part of anything. I'd wanted a ride to end normally. But I stayed because the bag was evidence and because someone might have needed the police to find him. After that night, I kept the passenger seat empty a little longer than usual. I checked the floor before I put my feet down. Sometimes on a red light, I'd feel the car's small hush and picture a bag on the floor, a smear, a hand that hadn't been steady. I took a different route home for a few weeks, and I started keeping a small flashlight in the glove box. It was the dumbest and simplest thing to do, but the light made me feel like I could see the small details if they came back again. The days moved and the police closed their loops. The man who'd run was okay. He'd been taken to hospital and then released to work with detectives. The other guy, the one who supposedly started it, was arrested the next day after a tip came in from a camera near the park. None of that made the night look clean. It left a kind of bruise under the skin that only showed when I turned too fast and found the memory. I kept driving. I told myself I did what anyone would do. Call the police. Don't touch evidence. Wait. But more than the checklist, a different thing settled, a new tightness when someone climbed in and asked to go far at night. The city had always been full of small surprises. That night taught me how quickly a small thing, a dropped bag, a flash of blood, a running hoodie, could rewrite a dozen people's plans. I learned to be quieter with my eyes and to keep the hazards ready. And in the mornings when the world felt ordinary, I'd still catch my hands worrying the edge of the passenger seat, like checking a place where something might have been left behind. I ordered the ride because I was late and I was tired and I didn't want to stand in the rain. The app showed a black sedan, a name Derek, and a license plate. The pin on the map blinked the way it always did, and I watched the countdown like something I could control. When the car pulled up, it looked exactly like the picture. Same dent on the rear bumper, same cracked hubcap, same little faded sticker in the corner of the windshield. The driver leaned forward and said my name without asking. "Hey, Mark," he said. Not a question. Not, "Are you Mark?" Just my name, like he'd been hired to say it. People do that sometimes. Guys at the airport call out names and a lot of them are right. I looked at the app on my phone, at the plate number, at the photo. It matched. I slid into the back and told myself to relax. For the first few minutes I tried to be polite the way you are with any driver at 1 in the morning. The driver didn't make small talk. He checked the rear view a lot. That part felt normal, drivers watch mirrors. But then he said, like a casual detail, "You get off at Maple in the morning, right? The brown house, blue gate." I blinked. That was my street. I didn't tell him I'd gotten in that habit of leaving 10 minutes earlier to get Maya on the bus. He sounded like he had the word Maya in his pocket. His voice was the kind that made facts settle into a room. "It's the routine," he said. "You never lock the side gate when you take the trash out." I told him, "Yeah. Habit." My voice came out small. Those little things added up. He knew what I drank in the morning. He knew the sound my kid's bike made when it hit the curb. He told me the name of the guy who delivered my propane. It could have been coincidence or a guy who drove that route a lot. People share cities. But there was a lean to the way he said it, like he was collecting details and setting them on a table. We crossed the river and the city loosened and the night got softer. The rain had stopped and the world smelled like wet concrete. My phone buzzed and it was the usual, a text from work about a meeting, but when I glanced down the app didn't show movement. The map pin sat where it had when I stepped out. I tapped call driver and the call went straight to voicemail. My battery was half dead and the screen dimmed. I slid it back into my pocket. At a light, a car pulled up behind us and stayed too close. That's the little thing that can make you watch other mirrors. I moved slightly so my shoulder could catch the window and I watched the driver in the rear view. He didn't seem bothered. If anything, he smiled at the car behind like someone acknowledging a neighbor. I didn't know the neighbor. I started noticing small things about him, the white freckle near his eyebrow, the way he held a pen between his teeth when he talked on the phone, the little scar on his hand where he had bandaged it. He reached down, and I saw a folded piece of paper on his passenger seat. He smoothed it like a map. Once he glanced at me and said, "You leave at 7. Not a question again. Like a line in a script. I told him to take me to my address. He put the car in gear and said, "Sure, go home eventually." The eventually didn't land like a joke. The turn he took didn't make sense. He went the long way, past the industrial stretch I never used. I watched the GPS on my phone finally wake and show 2 lines wildly far apart. I asked about it and he said, "Traffic's messy. I know a back route." He pressed his thumb against the little fading logo on the steering wheel and didn't look at me when he said it. We drove like that, a steady quiet with the engine and the tires and his feet making small rhythms. I tried to text my wife, but the message kept saying not delivered. For a second, the idea that helped me most was silly and useless, that I could get out at a gas station and go home 3 blocks on my own feet. But the highway was the highway and there were no lights at that stretch, and when I imagined stepping out I could see a long wet shoulder and rows of sleeping trucks and lightning bugs that could have been eyes. It was 100 small noises that made the dread grow. A plastic bag slapped against the curb and the driver just watched it like it mattered. He tapped the dashboard twice in time with the wipers. He answered a call in the middle of a sentence and said, very clearly and calm, he knows the house. I started talking like someone trying to explain a math problem. Look, I checked the plate in your photo in the app. You are on the app as Derek, right? Because my pickup said Derek. His hands moved without looking at them and he said, Derek booked you. Not you booked Derek. Derek booked you. The grammar was small and the meaning was big. My throat was dry and I thought of calling Uber support, but my phone light and the signal dropped at the dumbest times. I tried to hold on to the idea that someone at tech support could make sense of the numbers in the photo and then an app message would pop up any second saying your driver has arrived, the normal thing that confirms the world. Nothing came. The car slowed as if through a neighborhood. Houses blurred. He took a narrow left that I had never seen before and the streetlights became stranger, spaced like they were keeping a secret. I said, pull over. Right here. He let the car creep and then stopped. He turned to look at me in the mirror for the first time like a person looking at a problem. He asked, do you want out? And the way he said it made me feel as if whatever I chose would decide someone's mood for the night. I told him yes. The door handle was heavy and the rain on the roof made a slow drum. I opened the door as if it had a doorbell and stepped out, the pavement cold under my shoes. He asked me my name again like someone checking a list and said, careful, as if he were warning me about an animal that might appear. I walked off the curb and didn't look back. I waited under a streetlight with my phone in my hand and every time the screen lit I checked the app like a pulse. I waited 10, 20 minutes. I tried to call the number he had texted from. There had been a text when I climbed in that said simply on my way with a thumbs up emoji. The number didn't answer. My chest felt tight in a way I hadn't felt before. An hour later, when I was safe in a diner with coffee that tasted like old pennies and with the people in the booths looking at me like I'd come in from another country, my phone buzzed. The message preview on the lock screen said, I'm here. Where are you? It was from a number labeled in my phone under the Uber booking. The driver's name and a photo I recognized had been attached when I ordered. It was the real Derek. He'd been at the corner where I'd stood, on the app waiting for the ride I'd booked. He had sat there for an hour, his car empty, his meter not running, wondering. When I read that message, the diner noise condensed into edges. I typed back with the hands of someone who had been running slightly behind their own life. I got in the wrong car. I got out. I'm safe. I hit send and then sat there like a man who had left his wallet by the counter and only realized when the bill came to the table. The police came because Derek called them, and because the actual driver said his car had been copied and his plate and his photo had been used. They traced the license, and then the real plate turned out to be a cheap printed sticker someone had put on an older sedan's bumper. The real Derek was shaken because someone had made him into a sign and then used that sign to take me. They asked me where I had been dropped and I told them. They wanted details in the precise, awful way that pulls a memory apart so you can see the seams. I gave them the parts one had kept, the way he said my name, the map, the call that went straight to voicemail, the paper on his passenger seat, the way he watched my hands. They took my statement and told me to change my pickup habits, to wait under shelter and not the curb. They said they'd look at cameras on the route. It turned out the man who picked me up had been watching my neighborhood for a while, the detective said later. He had followed my routine, the small things that make a life recognizable. He used the details to sound harmless. He used the app's icon like a uniform. I could picture him in that car practicing lines, names like weights he could lift out of me. I went home that night and locked the doors twice. I put the kids to bed and didn't say much about it because there wasn't a way to make the words small and presentable. The next morning I stood at my bus stop under the big oak and listened to the people around me. I learned to check plates and faces and to text my wife the second their car pulled up. The app now had shared trip on my main screen and I hit it like a reflex. It wasn't dramatic. I wasn't kidnapped or tied up. I had been polite and tired, and that had been enough. The real shock wasn't the moment I got out of the car. It was the way someone could take the shape of the world, the plate, the photo, my name like a business card, and worry to get inside it. Hours later, when a text arrived from a man who'd been waiting where I'd stood, the world of small certainties cracked. I learned that you can be careful and still be almost taken. It made me change the small things I didn't think mattered, and the small things did. I got into the car like I'd done 100 times before. It was late, close to midnight, and I was leaving a friend's apartment across town. The streets were quiet, damp from rain earlier, the kind of night where even your own footsteps sound too loud. I ordered an Uber, watched the little car icon move toward me, and when the sedan pulled up, I double-checked the license plate. It matched exactly. I slid into the back seat, shut the door, and before I could even adjust my jacket, I heard the click. It wasn't the normal sound of the doors auto-locking when the car starts moving. It was louder, sharper. Manual. The driver had reached across his console and hit the switch. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just how his car worked. But then, without saying a word to me, he reached down under the dash and flipped on this little black device I'd never seen before. It had a faint red light that glowed, then went steady. He glanced at it, almost like he was checking the time, and then put the car in drive. I glanced down at my phone, like I always do at the start of a ride, and my stomach dropped. The app wasn't showing we were moving. It just sat there, stuck on the pickup point, like I hadn't gone anywhere. I refreshed it, closed and reopened it, but the route never started. It just said, waiting for ride. I tried not to panic. Maybe it was a glitch. But the timing, the lock, the little box. I couldn't shake how deliberate it looked. The driver hadn't spoken a word to me yet. No hello, no you headed to ____. Nothing. He just drove. His hands were tight on the wheel, his face set straight ahead. The only noise in the car was the hum of the engine and the soft squeak of the windshield wipers against the glass. After about a minute, I said my drop-off address out loud, just to break the silence. He didn't acknowledge me. Didn't nod, didn't say yep, nothing. Just kept driving. I watched the street signs and quickly realized he hadn't taken the most direct route. I knew the area. Instead of heading east like the app said, he turned south, into a more industrial part of the city. Fewer houses, more warehouses, longer stretches without lights. I tried again, louder this time. Hey, my drop-off is on Pine Street. Do you want me to put it in your GPS? This time he spoke, but his voice was flat, almost distracted. I know where we're going. That's all he said. The roads got emptier the farther we went. I could see the reflection of the red glow from his little black box on the windshield. My phone still wasn't showing movement, and the share trip button was grayed out, like the system didn't even know I was in a ride. I texted my friend, hey, still in the car, app is glitching, you still see me moving? A few seconds later, the dots appeared, then her reply, no. It still shows you outside my building. Did you cancel? My heart sank. I typed back, no. Still in car. Not showing. I hit send, but the message hummed there with a little spinning circle. No service. Just one bar and no data. I tried holding the phone higher, angling it toward the window, but nothing. That's when I realized how quiet it was outside. Normally you'd hear other cars at least, even at night. But the only sound was his tires on wet pavement, the occasional thump when we hit a seam in the road. We passed block after block of dark warehouses, chain link fences, loading docks. No pedestrians, no lit storefronts, nothing. I shifted in my seat, tried the door handle. It didn't budge. I pulled harder, quietly at first, then a little louder, hoping maybe it was stuck. But the driver glanced up at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes catching mine just long enough to make my chest tighten. The handle stayed locked. I forced myself to sound calm. "Hey, man, this isn't the right way. Can you just drop me off here? I'll get another ride." No response. He just kept driving. I started scanning the street for anything, a gas station, a lit window, even another car on the road. There was nothing. Just black buildings and puddles glowing faintly under distant lamps. The farther we went, the less familiar it looked. Finally, I pulled out my phone again, even though the service was garbage. I opened the camera, held it up like I was taking a selfie, but angled it so it caught his face in the frame. Then I pressed record. That got his attention. He glanced at me again in the mirror, longer this time, then back to the road. His jaw tightened. For a few more blocks we drove in silence, just that faint red glow from the box on the dash. Then, without warning, he slowed the car and pulled over next to a long stretch of chain link. No houses, no people, nothing nearby. Just a row of old shipping containers stacked behind the fence. He put the car in park. My chest felt like it was full of ice. He didn't look back at me. Didn't say a word. Just sat there with both hands on the wheel, staring out at the empty street. I don't know where the courage came from, but I forced my voice steady and said, "If you don't unlock the doors right now, I'm calling 911. I held my phone up, thumb hovering over the dial screen, praying I'd get even a scrap of service. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wipers squeaked once across the glass. His hands flexed on the wheel. Then, finally, I heard the click. All 4 doors unlocked at once. I didn't wait. I shoved the door open and bolted. I didn't even look back, just sprinted toward the first cross street I could see, my shoes splashing in the puddles, my heart hammering so hard I thought I'd fall. When I reached the corner, finally, a pair of headlights appeared down the road. A delivery van. I waved my arms like a lunatic until it slowed, and when the driver rolled down his window I practically begged him to let me sit inside until I called another ride. He must have seen the panic in my face because he just nodded and said, "Get in." From the passenger seat of that van, I looked back down the road. The black sedan was gone. Later, when I finally got home, my friend's messages all came through at once. "Where are you? Mark, are you okay? I'm calling the cops if you don't answer." I opened the Uber app again. The ride never showed up. According to the system, I'd never even been picked up. My trip history just ended at her apartment, like I never left. I don't know what the black box was, or how he managed to jam the app like that, but I know what I felt sitting in that back seat. That man wasn't taking me home. And if I hadn't pulled out my phone and pushed him with the 911 threat, I don't think I would have gotten out at all. I slid into the back seat of the Uber like I'd done 100 times before. It was late, close to 1 in the morning, and the streets around downtown were half empty. The driver looked normal enough. Middle-aged, polo shirt, clean car. He gave me a quick nod when I got in, nothing out of the ordinary. The app had already loaded the route. I recognized it, a straight shot down the main road, about 20 minutes, then a few left turns into my neighborhood. Easy. We started off fine. Small talk didn't happen, which was okay with me. I was tired, just wanted to get home. A couple minutes in, though, he glanced at the GPS and said, "I know a shortcut." I looked up. "Oh, sure," I muttered, not really caring as long as I got home. But instead of staying on the main road, he turned off after only a few blocks, heading into a part of town I didn't know very well. At first I thought maybe he was avoiding traffic lights, but the streets got emptier, darker. Storefronts gave way to shuttered warehouses, chain-link fences, half-lit parking lots with weeds cracking through the pavement. I checked my phone. The GPS was still tracking, but the line it showed was going one way and he was steering another. "Are you sure this way's faster?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quickly, without looking back. "No cops this way." The way he said it, like it was rehearsed, made my stomach tighten. A few minutes went by without either of us talking. The car hummed over potholes, headlights sweeping across long empty walls. I kept staring out the window, trying to memorize landmarks, but every block looked the same. Gray buildings, loading docks, metal doors with padlocks. That's when I noticed something off about the app. Normally it reroutes if you stray from the original path. This time, it didn't. The little blue line still showed the original route home, but there was no recalculation, no rerouting message. Just the car icon drifting further away from where it was supposed to be. I asked again, firmer this time. "Hey, where exactly are we going?" He didn't answer right away. His hands tightened on the wheel. Finally he said, "Relax." I said, "Shortcut." I could feel my pulse in my ears. I glanced at the doors. Locked. I quietly tugged at the handle just to be sure, but it didn't budge. A minute later, we stopped at a light. The intersection was dead. No other cars, no pedestrians, just long stretches of black road in every direction. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, not even glancing at the red light. His eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror and met mine. I looked away fast, pretending to scroll on my phone. I pulled up the share trip option, tried to send my location to a friend. The app froze. It spun for a few seconds, then went back to the ride screen without sending. I tried again, this time copying my location into a text. "On ride, weird route," I typed, but as I hit send, I noticed I had 0 bars. Not low signal. Nothing. The light turned green, and he didn't move right away. He just sat there, fingers tapping, eyes fixed straight ahead. Then, with no warning, he swung the car left deeper into the industrial area. At this point, I forced myself to say something. "Look, I really don't feel good about this. Can you just take me back to the main road?" He didn't reply. That silence was worse than anything. Not a single word. Just the low hum of the engine and the occasional rattle when we hit a pothole. I started thinking through options. The doors were locked. My window was up. My phone had no signal. My best bet would be to get him to stop. We passed another stretch of warehouses, then a building with a faded sign half lit by a broken lamp. That was the first landmark I thought I might remember later, so I stared at it, trying to burn the image into my head. Finally, I said, louder this time, "If you don't take me back, I'm calling the cops." That got a reaction. He chuckled. Just a low, breathy laugh. Then he said, almost too casually, "Phones don't work out here." I felt my mouth go dry. For another 2 minutes we drove in silence. The streets were getting narrower, fewer streetlights, some stretches so dark the only thing I could see was the beam of his headlights hitting the road ahead. I leaned slightly forward, pretending to stretch, and pressed the lock button on my door. It made a faint click, but nothing happened. He must have had the controls set from his side. The next time we slowed for a turn, I made a decision. As quietly as I could, I unbuckled my seatbelt and kept one hand near the handle. My heart was pounding so loud I thought he might hear it. We turned onto another long road lined with chain-link fences. Up ahead, I saw something I hadn't seen in almost 15 minutes, a gas station sign glowing faintly. The building itself looked half shut, only one pump lit, but it was something. I leaned forward. "Can you stop here? I need to use the bathroom." He didn't answer. I forced a laugh. "Seriously, man, I'm about to piss myself." Still no answer. But I noticed his grip on the wheel tighten again. We got closer. The driveway was maybe 30 yards away. I knew this was my only shot. The second the car slowed to take the corner, I yanked the handle and shoved my shoulder into the door. It flew open, and I stumbled out onto the pavement hard enough to scrape my knee, but I didn't care. I sprinted full tilt toward the gas station. Behind me, I heard the screech of brakes, then the slam of the door. He'd stopped. I didn't turn around. I just ran straight for the lit door of the convenience store, burst inside, and nearly knocked over a rack of chips. The clerk looked up, startled. I blurted out, "Call the police." "That guy, I couldn't even finish. I was shaking too hard. The clerk grabbed the phone immediately. I glanced back through the glass door. The car was gone. Just gone. When the cops showed up, I gave them the whole story. They checked my Uber app. The ride had ended 10 minutes earlier, marked as completed. My receipt showed I'd been dropped off at my home address. I ordered an Uber late one night after leaving a friend's apartment. It was a Thursday, close to midnight, and I just wanted to get home. I wasn't drunk or anything, just tired, and the idea of waiting for the bus at that hour didn't feel safe. The car pulled up within a couple of minutes. It was the right make, right color, even the same license plate number the app showed. The driver looked normal. Middle-aged, dark hoodie, quiet. He asked my name when I opened the door. I nodded, and he unlocked it. Everything felt normal enough. We drove for maybe 10 minutes without much conversation. I sat in the back scrolling on my phone, occasionally glancing up. The city lights started to thin out the farther we got from downtown, and soon it was just quiet neighborhoods and long stretches of empty road. Then, without saying anything, the driver pulled to the side of the road. At first I thought maybe he was lost or answering a text. But then he put the car in park, opened his door, and got out. I leaned forward a little, confused, but before I could ask what was happening, another man came around from the darkness and slid into the driver's seat. He was younger, maybe mid-30s, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He shut the door and turned toward me with this forced smile. "Shift change," he said. I froze. Nobody had ever mentioned anything about a shift change in all the years I'd used Uber. The app didn't say anything either. I checked the screen quickly. The ride was still active, showing the same driver, same car. I said, "What? I don't think that's how this works." The man kept the fake smile and put the car back in drive. "Don't worry, same ride." I wanted to get out right then, but we were pulled over on a dark stretch of road with no sidewalks, no businesses, just trees and a thin shoulder. It didn't feel like a good place to bolt. My phone showed 1 bar of service, but I didn't want to start making obvious moves while locked in a moving car. I sat back slowly, trying to act calm, but my chest felt tight. The new driver pulled back onto the road, heading the same direction as before. His driving was different, though. The first guy drove normally, steady, didn't speed. This one had these little jerks in the wheel, tapping the brakes when he didn't need to, like he wasn't used to the car. Every few minutes, he'd glance into the rearview mirror, not a casual check but a long stare, holding eye contact with me until I looked away. The ride timer on my app kept going, but the little car icon had stopped moving. It was frozen on the spot where we pulled over. My location dot moved along the map, but the car didn't. That scared me more than anything so far. It meant if something happened, the ride record wouldn't even show where I actually was. I started thinking of excuses to get him to stop somewhere public. I asked, "Hey, can we swing by a gas station? I need water." He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "No stations on this route." But I knew there was one. I'd passed it dozens of times going home. I didn't correct him. A couple minutes later, we hit a red light. My chance. I tried the door handle as quietly as I could. It didn't open. He'd locked the doors from his side. I swallowed hard and sat back again. The silence in that car was heavy. No radio, no talking, just the faint hum of the engine and the sound of the tires on asphalt. My own breathing sounded too loud. Every time I shifted in my seat, the fabric creaked like a gunshot. Finally, I said, steady as I could, "I don't feel safe. I'm going to end the ride." He chuckled, this low, ugly sound, and said, "You'll be fine." I opened the app and hit end trip anyway. It gave me an error. Trip cannot be ended at this time. My heart dropped. We passed another intersection. On the corner was a closed laundromat with a single flickering light above the door. It was the first building I'd seen in miles that wasn't just houses. I made a split-second decision. I said, "Stop here. I need to throw up." I leaned forward like I was sick. For whatever reason, maybe to avoid a mess in the car, he pulled over in front of the laundromat. The second the car slowed enough, I unlocked the door manually by pulling up the little knob and shoved it open. I didn't even look back. I ran straight to the laundromat door and yanked it. Locked. But there was a narrow alley around the side with a couple of dumpsters. I squeezed into the shadows and crouched behind one, pulling my phone out with shaking hands. This time I had 2 bars. I called 911, whispered what happened, gave the street name I'd just seen. The dispatcher told me to stay hidden until officers arrived. From where I crouched, I could see the car still idling by the curb. The driver's door opened. He stepped out, walked around slowly like he was looking for me. He even leaned down to peer into the laundromat window. I pressed myself flat against the dumpster, barely breathing. After what felt like forever, the sound of sirens came faint in the distance. The man whipped his head toward the noise, jumped back into the car, and drove off without shutting the passenger door all the way. 2 cruisers pulled up minutes later. I came out shaking, trying to explain. They took me to the station, asked a million questions, but they never found the car or either of the men. When I checked the Uber app again later, the ride showed as completed at my home address, with a normal 5-star driver profile picture smiling back at me. I got into an Uber late one night after leaving work. I'd been covering a shift and didn't feel like taking the bus that late. The app showed it would be about a 20-minute ride, nothing unusual. The car matched, plates matched, and the driver greeted me with a quick "You John" when I got in. I nodded, said yeah, and sat in the back. At first, everything was normal. He had the radio on low, some talk show playing. The car smelled faintly of smoke, like someone had lit a cigarette hours earlier, but that wasn't surprising. We drove in silence for a while. I checked my phone, half zoned out, but after a few minutes I noticed he didn't really follow the GPS on his dashboard. The screen clearly showed one way, and he took a left instead. It was still in the general direction of my place, so I didn't question it at first. Then he started talking. Not casual, friendly driver talk, but clipped, almost rehearsed sentences. This area, it's not safe at night. Lots of crime. Lots of problems. I mumbled something like, yeah, I guess, just to acknowledge him, and went back to staring at my phone. But he kept going, repeating himself. Not safe. You don't want trouble out here. Bad people. We weren't even in a bad part of town. It was just quiet residential streets. No one was around. His tone made the hair on my neck stand up, though. About 10 minutes into the ride, he slowed down and pulled into a darker side street, far away from the main road. I looked up from my phone, confused, and asked, "Why are we turning here?" The GPS says. He cut me off. Shortcut. Then, almost casually, he said, "So listen. Rides like this late, they're not safe. You don't know me. I don't know you. But I can make sure you get there safe." The way he said it wasn't comforting. It felt like a threat disguised as reassurance. Before I could respond, he added, "But I can't do that for the price Uber gives. Not worth it. You give me cash $40 and I'll take you right to your door. No problems." I froze. I thought I misheard him at first. The app had already charged me maybe $15. 40 cash on top of that was insane. I said, tearfully, I don't have cash." He shook his head slowly, still staring straight ahead. "Then it'll be a problem. This area, people disappear." He tapped the steering wheel with his thumb, steady and deliberate, like he was keeping rhythm. The street we were on was pitch dark. Just warehouses, chain-link fences, no businesses open, no houses. I realized he'd taken us far out of the way. My chest tightened. I glanced at my phone again. The Uber app still showed the route, but the little car wasn't moving on the map. Just stuck at a point from earlier. I tried to play dumb. "Look, I don't have cash. Can I Venmo you?" He let out a short laugh. "No. Cash only. I don't like apps." I kept my tone light. "I can stop at an ATM then." That seemed to please him. He nodded slowly. "Good idea. I'll take you to one." He kept driving, slower now, like he was thinking. The silence in the car was suffocating. The only sounds were the tires on the road and the faint hiss of static from the radio he hadn't tuned properly. I kept scanning for a chance to get out. But every stoplight we passed, he didn't stop long enough. He'd slow almost to a crawl, then roll through if no one else was around. It felt intentional. After a while he pulled up to a gas station. Closed. The lights were on inside, but the doors were locked. He pulled in anyway and parked by the side. He turned off the engine, finally looked at me through the rearview mirror, and said, "Go check. There's an ATM inside." My stomach dropped. The place was obviously closed. I realized then he probably didn't even want money. He just wanted me out of the car, isolated, where nobody was around. I pretended to fiddle with my phone, stalling. "Looks closed, man. Maybe try another one?" He didn't respond. Just stared at me through the mirror, unblinking. I thought fast. "Actually, I do have cash. I forgot." I patted my pockets like I was checking. Backpack in the trunk. Left my wallet in there. That finally made him turn around, curious. In the trunk? Yeah, I said quickly, forcing a shrug. Mind popping it? He hesitated. Then he got out, walked around to the back, and opened the trunk. The second I heard the latch click, I yanked the manual lock up on my door, shoved it open, and bolted. I sprinted across the lot toward the main road. My legs felt like they barely worked, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I heard him shout something behind me, then the slam of the trunk and the squeal of tires. I didn't look back until I hit the main road, waving frantically at the first pair of headlights I saw. A car slowed down, some woman rolled her window halfway, and I begged her to call the police. She must have seen the panic on my face because she unlocked the door and let me in. By the time officers showed up 20 minutes later, the Uber car was gone. I checked the app again. The ride showed as completed, with the receipt saying I'd been dropped off at my home address. I got into an Uber late one evening after grabbing dinner with a friend. It wasn't even that late, maybe 10:30, but I was tired and didn't feel like walking home. The car pulled up right outside the restaurant, a black sedan, plates matched, driver matched. Nothing unusual. The guy gave me a small nod when I got in. He didn't ask my name, which I thought was a little odd, but he had the app open on his phone on the dash, and it was my pickup address on there, so I didn't think much of it. I slid into the back seat, closed the door, and right away noticed how dark the interior was. No dome light came on, just a faint glow from the dash and his phone screen. The air smelled faintly of fast food, like fries and old grease. He said nothing, just tapped at the screen and started driving. I put my seatbelt on, pulled out my phone, and half zoned out. About 5 minutes in, I realized something weird. On the passenger side headrest, facing me, there was a little device clipped to the back. At first I thought it was one of those seatback phone holders people use for kids, but then I noticed a little red light. It was a GoPro, pointed straight at me. I stared at it for a while, trying not to make it obvious. I couldn't tell if it was recording, but the little red dot seemed like an indicator light. I finally asked, trying to sound casual, "Hey, is that recording?" The driver didn't answer right away. Then he just said, flatly, "For safety." I nodded slowly, though I'd been in plenty of Ubers before and never once had someone openly record the passenger. Dash cams, sure. But a camera pointed only at the back seat felt different. I looked at his rearview mirror. He wasn't making eye contact. He just kept driving, both hands on the wheel. The more I stared at that little red light, the more uncomfortable I felt. My reflection was faintly visible in the lens. I shifted in my seat, suddenly very aware of how cramped the car felt. The GPS on his phone showed the normal route, but every so often he'd ignore a turn and keep going straight. Not enough to make me think he was kidnapping me, but enough that the ETA jumped up a few minutes here and there. I checked my own phone. The app still showed the ride in progress, still tracking, but my stomach was tight. About 10 minutes later, we passed through an empty stretch of road between neighborhoods. No cars, no pedestrians, just dim streetlights every block or so. Out of nowhere, he spoke up. "You work around here?" The question felt too sharp, too sudden after all the silence. Yeah. Sort of, I said vaguely. He nodded, still not looking at me. "You live alone?" That made my skin crawl. I lied immediately. "No, with my girlfriend." Another nod. "She waiting for you?" "Yeah," I said firmly, like I wanted to shut it down. He didn't say anything else, but I watched his eyes in the mirror. Not constant, but every so often they flicked up toward me, then back to the road. The little red light from the GoPro blinked faintly in the corner of my vision the whole time. We hit a stoplight. I glanced at the camera again and finally noticed something else, a phone wedged between the seat and console, angled slightly back. Its screen was dark, but the rear camera was clearly pointed at me too. 2 cameras. I swallowed hard and pulled my jacket tighter, pretending to scroll my phone. I even opened the text screen, hovering my thumb over my girlfriend's contact, but I didn't want to set him off by typing something obvious. The silence stretched on. The sound of the tires against the road was loud in the quiet car. The vents clicked every time he adjusted the AC. After another 10 minutes, he suddenly turned down a side street I didn't recognize. My phone GPS buzzed immediately, saying recalculating. I think you missed a turn, I said. No, he replied simply. Shortcut. The street was lined with warehouses and chain-link fences. No cars, no open businesses, just big dark buildings. My pulse hammered in my ears. I considered asking to get out, but the doors had that heavy thud when I tried the handle earlier, and I wasn't sure if the child locks were on. Then, as if reading my mind, he spoke again. You don't need to worry. Cameras keep everything safe. His voice was calm, but the way he said it made me shiver. We drove deeper into the industrial area, and I couldn't take it anymore. I forced my voice to sound casual. Hey, can you actually just drop me at the gas station up ahead? I need to grab something. He didn't answer. I repeated it, louder this time. Just pull in there. Finally, he slowed and turned into the lot. My hands were shaking as I unbuckled before we even stopped. The second the car rolled close enough to the curb, I yanked the door handle hard. To my relief, it opened. No child lock. I jumped out before the car had even fully stopped. I walked quickly toward the convenience store, not running, but close to it. I didn't look back until I was through the sliding doors and under the bright fluorescent lights. When I finally turned, his car was still idling by the curb. He was just sitting there, staring straight ahead. Then, slowly, he pulled away. I told the cashier I needed to wait inside for a ride. Ordered another Uber, triple-checked the plates this time. When I got home later and checked the trip receipt, everything looked completely normal. Route, fare, driver's profile, it all matched. But the image of that little red light in the dark car, blinking steadily, hasn't left me. I ordered an Uber late one night after staying too long at a friend's place. It was a weeknight, close to midnight, and the buses had already stopped running. The car pulled up right where the app said it would, a silver sedan, license plate matched, picture matched. Nothing unusual. The driver greeted me with a quick hey when I got in, then immediately went quiet. He didn't ask my name, which struck me as slightly off, but the app pinged, ride started, and the GPS on his dash showed my address, so I told myself it was fine. The inside of the car smelled faintly of cologne mixed with something stale, like old smoke. The fabric seats were worn, not dirty, but just tired. He kept both hands on the wheel and drove without saying much. I figured he wasn't the chatty type, which was fine by me since I was tired. We'd been driving maybe 10 minutes when he suddenly said, I need to stop for gas. I looked out the window. We weren't near anything busy, just a stretch of road with closed storefronts and dark houses. My phone said I was 20 minutes from home. I didn't love the idea of stopping, but I nodded. Okay. A few minutes later, he turned into a small gas station lot. The sign was half-lit, buzzing faintly, but the pumps were dark and wrapped in yellow tape. Clearly closed. The convenience store was dark too, windows covered with metal grates. He parked near one of the pumps anyway and shut off the car. I stayed still in the back seat, waiting for him to explain. He didn't. He just said, "Won't be long," then got out. The door closed softly, and I watched him walk toward the side of the building. Not the pumps. Not even the front door. He disappeared around the corner, out of sight. That was when my stomach dropped. The engine wasn't running anymore, so the only sounds were the ticking of the cooling car and a distant hum from a streetlight. The lot was empty. I glanced behind me, no other cars, no people. Just me sitting in the back of a dead car at a dark, closed gas station, my driver somewhere I couldn't see. I pulled out my phone. The app still showed the ride as in progress. The little car icon was parked exactly where I was. But the timer on the trip kept ticking. I considered getting out, but the thought of standing alone in that lot was worse. At least the car had locks. Minutes passed. 2, maybe 3, but it felt much longer. I kept watching the corner where he'd gone, expecting him to come back into view. He didn't. Then I noticed something that made my chest tighten. The rearview mirror. It was tilted slightly downward, now aligned for his view of the road. It was angled at the back seat. At me. Had it been like that when I got in? I couldn't remember. I shifted in my seat, trying to keep my breathing steady. I checked my phone again. Full signal. I thought about calling someone, but what would I even say? My driver stopped for gas but didn't come back yet. It didn't sound like an emergency, even though every nerve in my body screamed that it was. I typed out a text to my girlfriend anyway, in an Uber. Stopped at weird gas station. Driver got out. My thumb hovered over send, but then I froze. What if he came back and saw me texting about him? I erased it. The silence pressed in. Every little sound seemed louder, the ticking engine, the faint rattle of something in the trunk when the wind shifted. I stared at the corner of the building until my eyes watered. Finally, footsteps. Slow, steady, coming back toward the car. I sat rigid, phone in my hand, pretending to scroll. The driver reappeared, walking casually like nothing was strange. His hands were empty. No receipt, no snack, nothing to suggest he'd been inside. He slid into the driver's seat and shut the door without looking at me. "Sorry about that," he said quietly. Then he started the car. I didn't answer. I just nodded, though he wasn't looking. We pulled back onto the road. My chest felt tight the whole time, like I couldn't take a full breath. I kept glancing at my phone, watching the map. We were headed in the right direction, but every turn felt slower than it should. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "Long night?" His voice startled me. I swallowed. "Yeah. Just want to get home." He hummed, a low sound in his throat, and went quiet again. We drove in silence for another stretch. I noticed he kept glancing at the rearview mirror. Not in the way drivers usually do, quickly, for traffic. Longer looks. Like he was checking on me. My palms were sweaty. I pulled up my girlfriend's number again and typed, "On way home." 10 minutes. I sent it this time. When we were finally close to my street, I lied. "Oh, can you actually drop me at the corner store by my place? I need to grab something." He didn't respond, just flicked on his blinker. The store was still open, lights bright inside. The moment the car stopped, I unbuckled and opened the door. My hand shook so badly I fumbled with the handle at first. I got out quickly, muttering thanks without looking at him, and walked fast into the store. I stayed inside until I saw the taillights disappear down the street. When I checked the app later, the ride looked perfectly normal. Pick up, drop off, fare charged. No strange detours, no notes. But that stop at the closed station, him walking out of sight for no reason, the mirror tilted at me, those details sat in my chest like a weight. I ordered an Uber after work because the buses were running slow and I just wanted to get home. It was winter, already dark by 6, and I was tired. The car pulled up fast, silver SUV, looked clean, nothing sketchy. License plate and driver photo matched. The guy behind the wheel looked mid-40s, heavy-set, baseball cap pulled low. He gave me a short nod, not much else. His car smelled like one of those pine-scented fresheners, but underneath it was another smell, faint and metallic, like old coins. I slid into the back and set my bag on the seat beside me. I kept my phone in my hand, just out of habit. The first 15 minutes were normal. He wasn't a talker, which I didn't mind. The road noise and heater filled the silence. I stared at the route on my app, watching the little blue line match up with where we were. At one point, I dropped my phone. It slipped out of my hand and slid down onto the floor in front of me. It landed in that gap under the seat, the kind of spot where you have to reach way down and fish around with your fingertips. I leaned forward to grab it. My fingers brushed something sticky on the carpet, and then something solid. I thought it was part of the seat frame at first, but when I shifted my hand, the edges felt wrong. Smooth, heavy, flat on one side. I pulled my hand back, used my phone's flashlight, and angled it down there. That's when I saw it. A gun. It was taped under the passenger seat, the barrel pointed back toward where I was sitting. Layers of duct tape held it snug against the frame. For a second I froze, hunched forward, staring at it. My stomach dropped hard, like I'd been pushed off a ledge. I forced myself upright again slowly, trying not to make any noise. My hand shook as I put my phone back in my lap, screen down, like nothing happened. The driver didn't say anything. He kept looking straight ahead, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift. But I noticed his eyes in the rearview mirror, glancing back at me just a little too long. My throat was dry. I swallowed and tried to look casual, staring out the window, tapping my knee. Inside, I was panicking. Why was there a gun taped under his seat? It wasn't just sitting there loose, forgotten. It was secured, on purpose. That made it worse. I thought about asking him to pull over, but I couldn't make my mouth work. What was I supposed to say? Hey, can you let me out? I just noticed the firearm taped under your seat. No way. I unlocked my phone and pulled up the Uber app again. Still on the route, still headed to my address. But we were on a quieter road now, fewer cars, no streetlights. The kind of stretch where, if he pulled over, no one would see. I needed a plan. I decided I'd fake a call. I turned my phone brightness down and hit my girlfriend's contact. When she answered, I said, loud enough for him to hear, "Hey, yeah, I'm almost home." "Yeah, like 5 minutes. I'll see you soon, just stay outside, okay?" My voice cracked a little, but I hoped it sounded normal. The driver's eyes flicked up in the mirror again. He didn't say anything. A minute later, I noticed his hands. He kept tightening his grip on the wheel, like flexing, then relaxing, then flexing again. His knuckles were pale in the glow from the dash. We passed another gas station. Open, lights on, people inside. He didn't slow down. Just drove right by. I forced myself to speak. "Hey, could you actually drop me at the 7-Eleven on Maple instead?" "It's on the way." He didn't answer at first. just kept driving. Then he said, flat, "That's not what the app says." "I know," I said quickly. "But my friend's meeting me there." Silence. He didn't respond. I gripped my bag tight, nails digging into the strap. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. Finally, he clicked the blinker. Fine. The longest 5 minutes of my life followed. Every corner we turned, I expected him to pull off somewhere dark. My eyes kept flicking down to the glow of my phone, watching the dot move, willing it closer to the store. When the 7-Eleven sign finally came into view, glowing green and red, I nearly cried from relief. The parking lot was half full, bright lights spilling out from the glass doors. He pulled up to the curb. The car barely stopped moving before I yanked the handle and got out. My legs felt like they didn't work right, but I forced them to. "Thanks," I muttered, not looking at him. I walked fast into the store, straight past the aisles, up to the counter where two clerks were talking. I pretended to browse snacks, my hands still shaking. I stayed inside until I watched his SUV pull out of the lot and disappear. When I got home later, I replayed it in my head 100 times. The taped gun. The way he looked at me in the mirror. The refusal to stop anywhere until I forced him. I reported the ride through the app, but all I got was a generic email thanking me for sharing feedback. Nothing specific. I didn't leave my real name. I just wanted it on record, in case someone else ever sat in that same seat and reached down. I ordered an Uber late one night after staying too long at a friend's place. It was almost midnight, cold, and I didn't feel like waiting around outside, so I watched the little car icon on the app inch closer until the headlights pulled up right in front of me. It was a black Toyota sedan, the kind you see everywhere. Plate number matched, driver's photo matched. He looked normal enough, mid-30s, trimmed beard, hoodie pulled tight, eyes kind of heavy like he'd been driving all day. He gave me a small wave, and I slid into the back seat. Inside smelled faintly like coffee and air freshener. The back seat was warm from the heater, and some soft radio station played low. He asked my name, I confirmed, then he just started driving. Pretty normal. For the first few minutes, everything felt fine. I was tired, staring out the window, watching the streetlights pass. The app said the ride would take about 25 minutes, and the route looked right. Then, maybe 10 minutes in, he pulled into a gas station lot and stopped the car. I sat up a little, confused. We weren't near my place yet, not even close. He leaned over the passenger seat, looked back at me, and said, "Hey, I just need to grab another rider." He's coming from here. That immediately didn't make sense. I glanced at the app. No update. No mention of a shared ride. And I hadn't requested Uber pool. I never do. I said, I didn't book a pool. He smiled, small, like it was nothing. Yeah, he paid cash. He's going the same way. Just a quick stop. I didn't know what to say. My gut twisted. The idea of someone just hopping in without being listed felt off. But before I could argue, a guy was already walking up from the shadows near the side of the building. Tall, hoodie pulled low, hands in his pockets. He didn't look at me as he opened the back door on the opposite side and slid in. He didn't hesitate either, like he already knew which car to get into. The seat shifted under his weight. He sat directly behind me. The driver gave a little nod, pulled back onto the road, like nothing was unusual. My phone screen glowed in my lap. I kept looking at it, pretending to scroll, but my hands were tied on the edges. The new guy didn't say a word. I could feel the air shift behind me with each breath he took. The radio was still on, some soft music, but now every sound felt too loud. My heart was beating fast, and I couldn't stop thinking how close he was to me, how if I leaned back even an inch, I'd brush his knees. I checked the app again. My drop-off location was still correct. But I noticed something. I couldn't see our little car icon moving anymore. The screen was frozen. I tapped it, refreshed. Still stuck. My signal was fine, but the ride tracking wasn't updating. I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, why isn't the app showing we're moving? The driver glanced at me in the mirror. Connection's bad out here sometimes, he said, like it was nothing. The man behind me chuckled under his breath. Just one short laugh. I stared at my phone screen so hard my eyes burned. The thought of texting someone crossed my mind, but what would I even type? I'm in an Uber and someone unlisted just got in. I didn't even know what street we were on anymore. The driver kept his eyes forward, both hands on the wheel now. The guy behind me shifted, pressing a knee lightly into the back of my seat. Not hard, just enough that I felt it. I tensed up immediately. He leaned forward slightly. His voice was low, almost too close to my ear. Why are you so quiet? I froze. My mouth went dry. The driver said nothing. Didn't even glance back. I forced out, just tired. Another chuckle behind me, this one longer. He sat back again, but the pressure of his knee didn't move. My brain was running circles. Should I tell the driver to pull over? Should I just open the door at the next red light and run? But what if the doors were locked from the front? What if the guy behind me grabbed me before I got out? The next few minutes stretched on forever. The car rolled down darker roads now, no shops, just stretches of empty warehouses and fences. The radio signal got fuzzy, static filling the space until the driver turned it down completely. The silence made my ears ring. Every time I shifted in my seat, the guy behind me shifted too, like mirroring me. His shoe tapped the floor in this uneven rhythm, scuffing against the mat. Not loud, but constant. Finally, I forced myself to speak. Actually, can you just drop me at the next gas station or somewhere well-lit? I need to grab something. The driver's jaw tightened. I could see it in the mirror. He didn't answer right away. The man behind me leaned forward again, close enough that I could smell his breath, sour and sharp. You don't need anything. You're fine. My skin crawled. I said louder, no, I need to stop. The driver finally spoke, voice flat. There's a station up ahead. The ride there was maybe 2 minutes, but it felt like an hour. My hands were shaking in my lap. I kept my phone angled like I was texting, but I was really just watching the reflection of the back seat in the screen. When the gas station lights finally appeared, I felt a rush of relief so strong it almost made me dizzy. The driver pulled into the lot, but instead of stopping by the front door, he slowed near the side where it was darker. I didn't wait. I grabbed my bag, yanked the handle, and shoved the door open before the car had fully stopped. I stumbled out, nearly tripping, then bolted toward the entrance. The clerk inside looked up as I came in fast, breathing hard. I pretended to browse, but kept glancing through the glass doors. The black Toyota idled by the pumps for a moment, both men staring out toward the store. Then, without either of them getting out, it rolled forward and disappeared back onto the road. I stood there in the bright fluorescent light, my heart pounding, trying to process what just happened. The ride started normal. I'd ordered an Uber after leaving a late shift at work. It was close to 11:30, colder than I expected, and I didn't feel like waiting around outside the building, so I stood just inside the doors watching for the car. It was a gray sedan, The kind you see everywhere. Plate matched, driver matched the photo. Middle-aged guy, round glasses, baseball cap pulled low. He gave me a quick nod when I opened the back door. Inside, the heat was running, and the smell was faintly like old coffee. The radio was turned down almost to silence. He asked my name, I said it, and he confirmed. Just routine. The first part of the ride was fine. I sat behind the passenger seat, half slouched, scrolling on my phone. He drove quietly, steady. No small talk, which was a relief since I was exhausted. About 15 minutes in, we were on a stretch of road I didn't really recognize. Lots of trees on either side, no sidewalks, just occasional streetlights spaced too far apart. The app showed we were still en route, though, so I didn't think much about it. Then the car jerked slightly, like he hit the brakes for no reason, and the engine noise changed. He eased it to the shoulder of the road and let it roll to a stop. I looked up, confused. We weren't near anything. Just trees, no buildings, no stores. Car trouble, he said flatly. No frustration in his voice, just like he was stating a fact. He kept the hazard lights off, which struck me as odd. I stayed quiet at first, waiting for him to pop the hood or something, but he didn't move. He just sat there, hands still on the wheel. After maybe 30 seconds, he pulled his phone out, tapped the screen a few times, and lifted it to his ear. He started speaking quickly in another language I didn't recognize. The tone was low, rushed, almost like whispering, but not quite. I glanced at the doors. The locks had clicked down when he stopped. I tried my handle, just lightly, not enough to make noise. It didn't budge. Child locks. My chest tightened. He kept talking on the phone, and I had the unnerving sense he was being careful not to look at me in the mirror. His eyes flicked upward once, then back to the windshield, like he didn't want me to know he was aware of my movements. I pretended to scroll my phone, but my hand shook a little. I tried opening the Uber app to check the route again, but the screen froze. The map wouldn't load. I glanced at the signal bars, 2 out of 5. Weak. His voice picked up speed on the call, sharper now. He used his free hand to gesture, pointing toward the passenger side window like whoever he was speaking to could see. The words meant nothing to me, but the tone felt urgent. I tried to think rationally. Cars break down. People call friends for help. That happens. But the locked doors, the spot we stopped, no lights, no traffic, and the way he avoided looking at me, it didn't add up. I said, "Do you need me to call a tow truck or something?" My voice came out smaller than I meant. He didn't respond. Didn't even glance my way. He just kept speaking into the phone, faster now, like he wanted to drown me out. I shifted in my seat, and the leather creaked loud in the silence between his words. For a split second, the sound seemed to break through. He froze mid-sentence, eyes flicking up to the rearview mirror, locking on mine. His expression was blank, but his stare felt sharp. Then he looked away and started talking again, even faster. Every nerve in my body screamed to get out. I checked my phone again, pretending to scroll. I pulled up the dial pad under my jacket so he couldn't see. Signal still weak, but maybe enough for a call. My thumb hovered over 911, but my mind spun with questions. What if they couldn't hear me? What if he noticed me talking and reacted before help came? Then I remembered something. Most Ubers have that emergency assistance button built into the app. I tapped it. Nothing. Screen froze again. My stomach dropped. The driver hung up the call, slipped the phone back into his hoodie pocket, and exhaled through his nose, like he'd made a decision. He reached forward and shut off the engine completely. The dashboard went black. Outside, the trees loomed darker without the headlights. We were just a dead car on a dark road, no other vehicles in sight. He finally spoke, first words since car trouble. "They'll be here soon." My throat went dry. I forced myself to ask, "Who?" No answer. He just adjusted his cap, leaned back in his seat, and stared at the windshield like he was waiting. Minutes dragged. Each one felt like an hour. My ears picked up everything, the faint ticking of the cooling engine, the occasional rustle of leaves outside, even my own pulse thumping in my head. A light flickered in the distance. Headlights, small, coming from behind us. My body went rigid. The driver sat up straighter. He reached over and clicked the hazard lights on this time, like a signal. That was it. Panic cut through my hesitation. I couldn't just sit there. I gripped my phone like a weapon and slammed my palm against the door lock, hard. To my surprise, it popped up. Maybe he hadn't engaged the master lock correctly. I yanked the handle and shoved the door open before I could think. The cold air hit me as I stumbled out onto the gravel shoulder. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to move. The driver shouted something sharp, not in English. I didn't look back. I sprinted toward the tree line, heart hammering, shoes slipping in the loose gravel. The approaching headlights lit up the road behind me. I didn't know if it was the he'd called or just some random car, but I wasn't waiting to find out. I crashed into the trees, branches scraping my arms, until I found a narrow ditch that dipped down away from the road. I crouched low, barely breathing, listening. The sedan's door slammed. Footsteps crunched on gravel. His voice called out, then answered by another voice farther down the road. The second set of headlights slowed, then stopped near the sedan. I heard muffled voices, two men speaking in that same language, words carrying sharp and quick. I stayed still, hidden in the dark, my phone clutched against my chest. Finally, after what felt like forever, the new car's door slammed shut again. Both sets of headlights lit up the trees, sweeping across the ditch where I pressed flat against the mud, barely avoiding the beam. Then they pulled away together, both cars rolling off down the road. The silence that followed felt unreal. My ears rang with it. I waited, crouched, until the red taillights vanished. Only then did I move, clawing my way back up toward the road. My phone still had weak signal, but enough this time. I called 911 with shaking hands, trying to explain where I was. They pinged my location and said a cruiser was on the way. When the flashing lights finally showed up 20 minutes later, I'd never been so relieved in my life.